Welcome, everybody. So glad you're here. I'm Sherry Doyle. I'm the director for the Center for Agrarian Learning here at McHenry County College. And I just want to say a couple of words of welcome. Well, first of all, has everyone figured out where the restrooms are? I'm in charge of logistics, so I will say if you haven't found them yet, you go past the reception, there's a purple sign on the ceiling, turn left and you'll be right there. There are some water bottles at the breakfast table. There's also refilling station where you can fill up your own water bottle over by the bathrooms, on the way to the bathrooms. So I know those things can be important. So we are excited to host this event. It was almost exactly 2 years ago in January of 2019 that the college launched the Center for Agrarian Learning. And this is exactly the type of event that we envisioned hosting and collaborating on and bringing to the community. It's happening because there's a collection of service providers and funders that really care about farming and land use in northern Illinois and beyond. And we wanted to create a gathering where you all could get information about how to enhance what you're already doing. So there's a lot of good work going on. And we know that farming is a constant learning process. So we want to provide spaces for you not only to learn from experts, but to learn from each other. So it takes creative thinking and motivation really to make farm businesses work. And it takes creative thinking and motivation to take care of the planet and to get food on everyone's table. It's a heavy lift. And so we want to be here to help with that if we can. Briefly, I'll tell you about a couple programs here. So, speaking of creative thinking, we have a new applied associate's degree here called Entrepreneurial Agriculture. So students take business classes as well as plant science and soil science, and they work in hands-on production on the very new and growing MCC student farm. So right now we have diversified vegetables in production, and this spring we're adding fruit, demonstrations of high tensile trellising, high density trellising, really lovable fruits like strawberries and raspberries, as well as elderberries and hazelnuts and things that are highly nutritious and maybe a little trickier to make economically viable, and we want to teach about all of it. So that's a new program. We have 19 students enrolled in the middle of a pandemic, and we're super excited about that. And we also have the center really focuses on, like I said, programs like this. So we're pretty focused on farm viability, so these are just some old flyers. We've had programs like talking about the whole grain supply chain right here in northern Illinois. We had Hemp Today, it was just 2 weeks ago, talking about industrial hemp, both growing and marketing it. So these are the types of things that we want to provide. We're really looking at supporting the local food system predominantly from the producer side, but also having events that educate consumers as well. And help with the buy side. One little update that is, I'd love for you to hear about, is that we are doing a feasibility study right now for a food hub to be located on campus. So it's just a study. So please don't tell your neighbors that MCC is putting a food hub on their campus. We're not sure if it's the right fit. But in order for us to know if an aggregation for a facility for local food or a processing facility for local food is a good idea, we need to hear from you all. So we're doing a series of interviews, and if you're like, oh, that sounds kind of cool, that might be helpful to me, or my neighbor farmer, please talk to me. I have a table out there. You can sign up for our email list, but mostly I want to know if you're interested in that project, because I would love to be able to ask you questions about what you might see as a good thing for us to do here at the college. So that's just a little leaked out information, because we're hoping to understand this in only 9 months. So I'm looking for a lot of feedback. All right, I've probably spoken for too long. Okay, let's get started. Oh, one last thing. Open Lands is here. Lucia is going to be taking some photographs, so if you see someone taking pictures, that's what's going on. Thank you, Spring.
Thank you, Sherry, for the welcome, and to the college for allowing us to use your wonderful facility today. My name is Spring Duffy. I'm the Executive Director of the Mchenry Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. And on behalf of my Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you here today. I do have one of those directors here sitting in the front row, Dean Farr, if you could raise your hands. Thank you for coming. That's right in the corner. It is our hope today that today will provide you with the resources necessary to apply some new conservation practices on your field. We will be recording today's workshop, so if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, please raise your hand and we will be bringing a microphone to you. We want to make sure we capture all the questions on our recording. Our first session today is getting cover crops on the ground, and our speaker is Doug Gust. Doug, aka Digger, is the owner of Digger Doug's Crop Dusting Services Incorporated. Doug has been an aerial applicator since 2010. He grew up farming and then had a career in excavating. In addition, Doug also had a successful career as a professional motocross racer. In 2010, he became a licensed aerial applicator and has enjoyed owning and operating his business. Please welcome Doug to the stage.
Hello. Well, thanks to everyone at Farm Foundation for asking me to come and talk to you guys about aerial application of cover crops. We all know the benefits of cover crops. I'm here to tell you all the benefits of using aerial application to seed these crops. Harvest season is a busy time. There's so much for a grower to organize, manage, and stay on top of that. Adding one more thing during the season, like seeding cover crops, may seem way too daunting. However, there are other seeding options for growers to consider that don't require any additional physical labor on the grower's part, such as aerial seeding. Aerial seeding is an ideal choice for getting cover crops seeded when time is of the essence, or when ground conditions are less than ideal for equipment, like when soil is wet. A fixed-wing airplane with reasonably close landing, loading, and takeoff strip can seed up to 1,500 acres per day. Aerial application still provides the same flexibility as other methods for planting cover crops mixes, as you can still seed multiple cover crop species at once. Aerial application of cover crops has become a method that farmers have started to utilize to give them the advantage of early application. By applying earlier in the year, farmers can see better growth out of a winter kill species and better overwintering of winter hardy cover crops. The best time to apply many cover crops is when the harvestable cash crop is still standing. Aerial application offers the ability to spread the cover crop seed over the existing crop without any damage or disruption to the standing crop. This means the cover crop can already be established when the cash crop is harvested. An important aspect to successful aerial application is, of course, the weather and soil conditions. Having moisture in the soil before application helps the seeds to start germinating rather than applying to a dry seed bed. A rain after application also helps to get those seeds germinating and improves contact with the soil. When applying cover crops seed into standing soybeans crop, farmers need to evaluate plant stage before flying on the seed. The main goal is to target when the leaves are turning yellow before the leaf drop or before they have dropped more than 10% of their leaves. By spreading on the seed before leaf drop, farmers get better seed to soil contact and give the seed a better moisture bed when the leaves fall. When planting in the corn, wait until plants have dried or withered up to the ear. When the leaves begin to close together and dry out, or when the kernel milk line is at least 50% formed. For silage corn, do aerial seeding several weeks before cutting silage. When the corn is in early dent stage, this allows sunlight before leaves drop and the cover crop seeds. As general rule, aerial seeded cover crops should be sown on at least 7 to 10 days earlier than drilled cover crops because they are somewhat slower to establish a stand. Seeding rates for aerial application needs to be increased above rates recommended for drilled or incorporated seeding. An exception to this is the brassicas, which include radish, turnips, and mustards, which generally have the same recommendation rate for aerial seeding as for drilled or incorporated seeding. Generally, aerial seeding rates need to be 25 to 50% higher than drilled rates to achieve the same stand. Higher seed rates are required because they are greater risk of insect damage or rodents and birds eating seeds in the soil surface. In conclusion, benefits to aerial seeding. Substantial winter coverage. Farmers can establish a cover crop months before cash crop harvest in the early fall. The cover crop will establish and grow under the corn and soy vegetation. When the grains and the beans are harvested, the newly seeded cover crops will remain protecting the soil from erosion throughout the winter. Early establishment allows the cover crops to accumulate substantial above and below ground biomass before winter and therefore better prevent nutrient leaching and surface runoff during the winter. Soil health is improved as decomposing cover crops add natural nutrient compounds to the ground, including nitrogen. In turn, this reduces the need for future nitrogen fertilizer applications, lowering the production costs of cash crops and reducing fertilizer runoff. Reducing the need for fertilizer makes cover crops ideal for improving soil health over a large area. This is where aerial application are uniquely qualified to help farmers seed cover crop. Due to the speed and precise timing of aerial application and longer time frame an aerial applied cover crop has to grow, aerate, and contribute natural nutrients and moisture to the soil. Multi-species establishment. Farmers can establish a multi-species cover crop months before cash crop harvest in the early fall. For example, clovers, turnips, radishes, and some grasses would not have time to establish if planted late fall after corn and soybean harvest. No crop damage. Other methods of cover crop application within standing cash crops, interseeding, and high crop seeding can cause substantial crop damage, particularly on the smaller, unevenly shaped fields in our area of the Northeast. No soil damage. Farmers rushing to establish cover crops after cash crop harvest can damage and soil structure when planting cover crops in wet fields. An important aspect to successful aerial application is, of course, the weather and soil conditions. Having moisture in the soil before application helps the seeds start to germinate rather than applying to a dry seed bed. A rain after application also helps to get those seeds germinating and improves contact with the soil. When applying cover crop seed into standing soybean, crop farmers need to evaluate plant stage before flying on the seed. The main goal is to target when the leaves are turning yellow before the leaves drop. They have dropped more than 10% of their leaves. By spreading on the seed before the leaf drop, farmers get better seed to soil contact and give the seed better moisture when the leaves fall. No equipment required. Lack of access to a no-till drill is sometimes a problem faced by farmers. Specialized equipment is not necessary for aerial seeding. Aerial seeding allows an extra month for cover crops to grow and build soil. In most cases, cost of aerial application of cover crop is comparable to other seeding methods. I guess I'm supposed to have a little clicker here, and I don't know is this the clicker? And then questions now. All right, does anybody have any questions on aerial seeding, cover crop seeding? It's this gentleman down there.
Just wait.
You suggested that the cost was comparable to seeding, but a range of order of magnitude, what does it cost for aerial application? And do you need at least a certain size field to make it work?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in this, but on average, if a farmer were to put down, say, 50 pounds of cereal rye per acre, our application cost, if the field's within 10 miles of a landing strip, is usually about $14 an acre.
That's what I wanted to know.
You got another one? Okay, there's someone.
In 2019, 2020, when we had all the prevent plant acres, obviously you can see more from above than we can see down below. When you went out and covered those acres with a cover crop, whether it be soybeans or whatever we had to put on those acres, would you say that 50% of them got covered, more, less? A lot of them go to weeds?
In 19 and 20, what was that question
When we had
about?
all the prevent plant, because it was so wet and we couldn't get out and actually do anything. We didn't plant a corn crop, a bean crop. I mean,
Right. Yeah, I would say 50%. I mean, you know, when you fly cover crop on the bare ground, obviously it doesn't have any coverage if there's not corn standing or beans standing. You know, you need some kind of blockage when the leaves fall. You know, it protects the seed. But I would say, yeah, about 50%. And of course, us being in the air, we get to see all your bad spots, what you missed, what didn't grow, you know, a lot of. But everybody has drones now, I think, are getting drones, so they get to see their crops too. We had a wet year down. We fly all the way down by St. Louis, and this past year it was really wet, obviously opposite of us being in a drought. And they were having us fly on beans over their corn just to get another crop because their corn had died from it being so wet. A lot of land was flooded down there. So.
I just was going to follow up. What's the minimum size field you would spray aerially?
That all depends. I mean, if you had, say, a 5-acre field you wanted me to do, it's tough for me just to come and do a 5-acre field for that price, obviously. But if I had other fields in the area or other growers I was working for, then a 5-acre field would be no problem. So.
Do you have minimum rates you apply or maximum rates, certain seed you can't?
Yeah, for cover crop, our rate is usually $11 an acre plus 6 cents a pound. I don't recommend going under 25 pounds an acre. I've seen guys ask for less, and you just don't see the stand. You might see it more in the spring than you would in the fall, you know, after it's sat all winter and in spring. But just because you're throwing that seed on top of the ground, and if you don't get a good rain, or you know, you don't have moisture, or you don't have good ground, I mean, if you have hard pan like this floor, I mean, it's tough to get the cover crop to germinate.
Any other questions for Doug?
What would you say is the amount of acres you're covering right now? How many planes do you have, and do you have access to more?
Well, we run 4 airplanes. We run 2 air tractors and 2 Cessnas. Last year we covered, I believe, 107,000 acres of fungicide. As far as cover crop, every year I see a little bit more and a little bit more, and we work Wisconsin, Illinois. I'm going to say we probably did 4,000 or 5,000 acres of cover crop this past fall, and you know, it's not a rush like the fungicide run. So you know, I usually only use 1 airplane, but if I get called that, you know, hey, we got this many acres or this many, you know, I can get my other planes going, my other pilots, and we can take care of it.
I have a question, kind of follow up with Dan, is so you actually have capacity to come and do more acres here, McHenry County or Lake County up in this area. That's not an issue. You have capacity to do more.
Oh, yeah. With 4 airplanes going, I mean, we can cover, on a good day, cover crop, if the fields are close, can get almost 1,500 acres done a day with one plane, so.
Can I go ahead? So these are impressive benefits. I'm just curious what impact it has on the harvester when there's the crops that are already starting to grow before they harvest.
I think you're asking what's the benefits
Here,
of flying on area. There you go.
No, sorry. No, I'm just curious what the impact is on the harvest of the cash crop that may be in place with having the cover crop in earlier.
I don't think there is any impact on it. I mean, unless you really flew it on early and it started growing taller than the beans you're going to harvest, that would probably have an impact, you know. But other than that, I mean, by the time you fly it on, your cash crop is already done. You know, there's no more yields to be expected or anything, so it shouldn't take anything from the cash crop.
Awesome.
And I know a gentleman in this area that had me fly it on, I believe in June, and I don't know if he's here or not, but he had me fly some on in June when the corn was maybe knee tall, and he said it worked really good. And what happens then is it gets a good stand before the corn canopy's over, and then it goes dormant until fall, and he liked it. He said it worked good, so that was the first time I've ever done cover crop in June.
So I'm hearing you say it doesn't impact the yield, but what about the actual process of the harvest? Like someone's leasing our land, and I'm just anticipating any pushback about why that wouldn't be so good to do.
Yeah,
if there is any.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I can answer that question
Okay.
for you.
Thanks.
Maybe Cody can.
To answer your question, so like in a soybean crop, we cut that to the ground. I mean, shaving the dirt. And, you know, in that situation, anything that's growing above ground, even if it's just a little rye shoot, it's either going to dull the blades or get in the grain tank if you can't get it cleaned out. Green never cleans out near as well as a dry, dead crop. So, you know, on a bean crop, it becomes very hard. Corn, I mean, you're picking 3 foot off the ground. You know, that's not near as big an issue. Yeah, unless it's down, and then, yeah, absolutely, then you're dragging through that stuff. So it's really hard to seed into beans, in my opinion. We've done it, and I've have customers who've done it and never seen that turn out very well unless you just absolutely nail it on getting the bean crop out before it really establishes.
So we're talking about less damage to the field. I run 30 acres where I have my home strip, and I always fly on cover crop, and I actually will fly on winter wheat over beans and try to have a cash crop the next year out of it. And speaking of ground compaction, after I had flown on the wheat and they harvested the beans, you can see in the cover, or in the wheat cover crop / cash crop in my case, you can see everywhere the combine went. The crop goes like this, and then it'll drop down where the tire track is because of the compaction. So it really, compaction is a big thing for cover crop also, because whenever you compact, obviously the water runs off, doesn't soak in.
Hi, I'm curious what all the different cover crops you've been planting in the area are. Like, yeah, different types of crops. You've mentioned rye, you've mentioned wheat.
Yeah, usually cereal rye is the most common, with some radishes and turnips in it. And annual rye, but I hear annual rye is harder to kill, obviously, the next year, you know, so cereal rye is the way to go. And I know in Indiana, I have a buddy that's an operator there that they do a lot of cover crop. He does over 20,000 acres in the fall, and he says they do it to kill out a lot of the unwanted weeds that Roundup is no longer taking care of in the spring. So they just, you know, they really put a lot of cover crop on to drown out all the bad weeds.
Any other questions for Doug?
Do you ever do any frost seeding?
No, I have never done that. Never done any frost seeding. I heard about it, I just read about it, but I'm not very educated on it.
So when you're actually flying the cover crop on, are you actually pressurizing out the seed, or is it actually just free flow gravity?
It's free flowing out a spreader pan we have on under the plane, so we're averaging 140, 145 mile an hour across the field, and we open the hopper up to whatever rate we are set to go, and it drops down into a spreader pan, and it spreads it about 80 feet wide. Our effective swath width is 80. It actually spreads it depending on what kind of seed that you're flying on, but it'll spread at 120 feet, but our average swath width is 80. Obviously, different seeds are different, and I've learned through my years, oats are a lot lighter, you know, so you have to change your swath width. And grasses, like regular grass seed, you know, that's so light it ain't going to spread that far. So it all depends on what you're putting down.
Do you always put it on with a plane, or do you put it on with a helicopter?
Always with a plane. I don't own any helicopters. We're all fixed wing.
Thank you.
Do you have any issues applying cover crop in proximity to municipalities or houses or subdivisions, something like that?
Yeah, I spray fungicide right around here, these fields all around this campus here. As far as cover crop goes, you don't have to be as low. You can be like 75 feet above the crop, where fungicide you have to be 5 to 10 feet approximate, you know, to get a good coverage. When we get into congested areas, we call it, and the FAA they don't really define what a congested area is. It could be 10-house subdivision, or maybe it's only a 5-house subdivision. Usually, if we're going to go into an area that's really congested, we ask the grower to contact the neighbors. Sometimes they have to put a letter in the newspaper or something to let the public know that, hey, there's going to be area applicators coming. And it's hard to do because what day you're actually going to be there because of the weather, obviously. But they have to notify them. That's the best way to do it, you know. So. But it can be done. I've been all the way down, I think it's Lake Cook and I-94, and it was a lot of subdivisions there, so. Yes.
Since you brought it up, is your application rate for fungicide all the same? Oh, is your application rate for spreading fungicide similar to the cover crop?
As far as price, you know, that's a lot cheaper. We'll do, it depends on if you want 2 gallons down an acre, 3 gallons coverage down. 2-gallon work is usually around $8 to $8.50, depending on the area. 3 gallons, $9.50 to $10. And we have pre-buy rates, and I think there's going to be flyers out on the table out there you can grab at lunch, and you'll be able to see our rates. So we can, fungicide, you can haul up a 200-acre load, where when you're doing cover crop, it's only 60, 70-acre load. So we can do it a lot cheaper because we can go out and cover a lot more ground with one load.
Do fertilizer prices have an impact on your company or any of that?
I'm sure they're gonna this year. From what I'm hearing, how much, we do spread a lot of urea on corn right before tassel. Guys like to get a second, they call it a spoon feeding the corn, spoon feeding nitrogen. And I got a feeling this year with the cost of fertilizer, it's probably going to go, our application, we're not going to be spreading as many acres.
Any other questions for Doug? Doug, are you able to stay around if they have some questions later on?
Yes, I'll be here.
Okay. All right. Thank
Well,
you
thank you,
very much.
everybody, and I'd like to thank my wife for volunteering me for this. Love you, honey. Thanks.
All right. Next on our agenda is the McHenry County Conservation District's Leases and Ag Programming with Benefits.
Our speaker is, I'll get this off. Our speaker is Brenna Ness. Brenna is the agriculture ecologist with the Mchenry County Conservation District. She has an MS in wildlife ecology from Iowa State University and a BS in zoology from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. She joined the staff at the district in 2021, where she manages 6,000 acres within the district's farm program. She grew up in central Illinois and is excited about her return to the Midwest after spending the last 6 years working for Delaware Wildlands, a nonprofit conservation organization in Delaware. Please welcome Brenna to the stage.
Thank you, Spring. Perfect. All right. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Still morning, right? My name is Brenna Ness, and I am the agricultural ecologist with McHenry County Conservation District. And I started with the district last May. And in my role, I work with our staff and tenant farmers to manage more than 6,000 acres of farmland and natural resources. This is a little bit of a repeat on information, but prior to coming to McHenry County, I worked for a nonprofit conservation organization managing 6,000 acres of natural land and farmland in Delaware. I grew up in central Illinois and went to school in southern Illinois and central Iowa, where I studied wildlife ecology. But you can't understand the needs of wildlife without understanding the entire ecosystem. So part of my work with the district is finding a balance between keeping our farmland productive and protecting ecological health and function. So today I'll be talking about how we're trying to do that, and I'll be going into detail about the priorities and goals of the district's farm program, as well as highlighting recent partnerships. To provide some context about the district, my position is nested within the Land Preservation and Natural Resources Division. And I'm lucky to work with a wonderful and collaborative team of people. Ed Collins is the director of the division, and Brad Woodson is the Natural Resources Manager. Elizabeth Kessler is the executive director of the Conservation District, and John Henning is the current president of our Board of Trustees. Gabe, Cindy, and Val are additional team members whose roles contribute greatly to the farm program. The farm program encompasses nearly 25% of the land owned and managed by the district, but it's also a very small proportion of the work that the division does. LP&R staff are planning, managing, and monitoring mitigations and restorations, monitoring and reintroducing wildlife, putting on educational programs, and much, much more. And our staff works together across all divisions to achieve our conservation goals and successfully implement the district's various programs. The mission of the district is to preserve, restore, and manage natural areas and open spaces to protect our water, wildlife, and way of life in McHenry County for the benefit of present and future generations. And this is what we've been doing for the last 50 years. Currently, the district owns or manages more than 25,600 acres of open space comprised of woodlands, prairies, wetlands, and of course, farmland. Many of the bond referendums and grants that we have used to protect land do not permit continued agricultural use. So many of our farmland acres have been restored and will continue to be restored. But the district's existing ag acres play an important role in preserving open space, providing ecological services, improving the soils, and preparing the site for restoration. Additionally, of course, these sites continue to support the local ag economy and tax base. The district currently manages more than 6,000 acres under the farm program, where we work with 70 different producers who help us achieve our goals to protect and conserve our natural resources. As the current stewards and storytellers of these conservation lands, I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize and express gratitude for those who blazed the trails of McHenry County, both literally and figuratively, and who cared for this land long before us. Many Native American groups once called Mchenry County their home, including the Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, Mascoutin, Menominee, Miami, the Council of Three Fires, which include the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, Peoria, Sauk, and Meskwaki peoples, and Sioux Nation. And we offer our respect to the Indigenous community past and present, as well as the contributions of their ancestors, as they are the foundation of our ecological management of McHenry County's natural resources. Not only that, but modern agriculture and much of the world's food supply has been influenced by farming methods used by Native Americans. So we celebrate these contributions, share the history of those who came before us, and advocate for these indigenous communities. For the farm program, of the nearly 6,200 acres of farmland owned by the district, the majority of that, about 4,800 acres, is currently in conventional row crop production, and another 800 acres, these two categories here, is utilized for hay production, and 400 acres is being grazed. In addition to our cropland acres, the farm program includes what we call farm conservation areas. These are the field borders, filter strips, and grass waterways, which function to filter nutrients, slow surface water runoff, reduce soil erosion, enhance infiltration, and provide habitat for wildlife. When we combine these categories, 30% of the acres managed by the farm program is in permanent cover. The district's farm management policy identifies 5 goals for the program, and at the top is to protect and conserve natural resources. The farm program continues to evolve, but we are consistently focused on how to enhance ecological health and implement conservation-forward practices. In addition to prioritizing natural resources, our goals are to build partnerships, be equitable, promote alternative agriculture, and support beginning and young farmers. Some of you may be curious about how to lease farmland with the district. Farm tracts available for lease are advertised in the Northwest Herald. They're posted to the district's website. They're shared with our partners and emailed to our list of current and prospective farmers. So if you'd like to receive emails about opportunities to lease our farmland, please get in touch with me directly to be added to our list. Bid packets for farm leases can be picked up at Lost Valley Visitor Center or downloaded from our website. From the website, you can hover over the About Us tab and select Bids and Requests. Available leases will be listed there, and you can click the link for an open bid to download the bid packet. Farm leases use a competitive public bidding process, which is one of the ways that we implement the program's goals to be equitable. Another goal of the program I mentioned is to build a partnership with our tenants. This is implemented through our farm leases, our rental formula, and our renewal process. On average, our ag leases are offered for a 3-year term with an opportunity to negotiate for renewal. The tenant also has the option to cancel the lease by a certain date without penalty. To keep the rental rate fair, the district utilizes a variable lease rate formula that's based on the land's productivity, the commodity corn price, and a negotiated percentage. The formula uses the respective crop year's February daily average settlement price for December corn futures as an adjusting variable to keep the rental rate in line with the market. This is the only variable that changes each year of the lease. The yield and negotiated percentage remain constant. Management of the district's farmland and the lease terms all aim to promote soil conservation, prioritize water quality, and protect wildlife habitat. Best management practices have provided a basic framework for these priorities. We and our tenants work with NRCS, FSA, and Soil and Water Conservation District to implement soil and water quality protection standards through the use of conservation plans. Also, every year, the district invests in drainage tile repairs and brush clearing to maintain the integrity of our farmland, as well as that of our neighbors and the adjacent ditches and streams. We're also continuing to seed field borders, installing grass waterways, and doing other earthwork as needed. But the district is looking beyond best management practices to identify how to improve soil structure and diversity of soil organisms, build organic matter, and improve infiltration. Specifically, we'd like to see expanded use of cover crops and continuous cover on the landscape, reduced tillage and pesticide use, and integration of livestock. Implementing these practices is valuable to the district because of the benefits to soil health, water quality, and wildlife habitat, as well as offsetting the impacts of climate change. Ultimately, we're interested in building soil and nurturing soil biology, increasing infiltration, mitigating the effects of severe storms and flooding, promoting healthier streams and cleaner waterways, improving wildlife habitat, and sequestering carbon. As I mentioned, the district's farm program has evolved over the years and continues to do so. In recent years, we've incorporated a number of practices into our ag leases that promote soil health. In 2017, we prohibited fall tillage with the exception of strip tillage to incorporate fertilizer, and we required cover crops on highly erodible land following a soybean or wheat crop. Our producers that do plant cover crops have been planting mostly single species, rye or oats. And our goal with this practice is to maintain adequate crop residue and soil coverage, as well as build soil organic matter. Crop rotation is also required, and most of our producers are planting corn and soy, though some are also planting wheat or alfalfa. Grass waterways are installed where soil erosion is a concern, but we're also working toward converting our highly erodible land to permanent cover. The district is also committed to advancing its goals through the use of a data-driven, conservation-oriented approach to farm management. And in 2019, we partnered with the Delta Institute, Liberty Prairie Foundation, and Foresight Design with a grant from Foodland Opportunity to develop an agricultural conservation index. This is a tool that was developed for monitoring our soils by tracking ag practices and assessing soil health indicators. So each year, in early summer, we conduct the field sampling protocols, which include worm counts, measuring residual cover and soil compaction, and assessing our farm conservation areas. Additional data is collected annually from each operator on their cropping systems, tillage practices, and nutrient and pesticide applications. To protect water quality, the district has implemented multiple practices for nutrient management, multiple practices and programs to reduce nutrient loss. Our farm operators are expected to use best management practices for nutrient management, which are ideally informed by soil tests. The soil test data that we do have show that average organic matter levels are consistent with what we would expect based on land use and soil type. So with our grazed parcels, there we go, having the highest organic matter levels, and the hay and row crop having the lowest. And our JGV over here, joint grass and venture, those are parcels that are also hayed. We're interested in soil organic matter because of its ability to increase water holding capacity and infiltration, to enhance mineral and nutrient availability, and to feed soil microbes that can help suppress plant pests and diseases. Most productive ag soils have between 3 and 6% organic matter, and there's a chunk of our cropland that has organic matter levels that are below this range. So for these sites that don't also have sandy soils, we'd like to be doing more to build up that soil health. The number of parcels that we currently require cover crops on, those highly erodible lands, that's a pretty minimal subset of our farmland. And even fewer producers are planting cover crops voluntarily. So as I mentioned, expanded cover crop use is one area we'd like to see more forward momentum. Woodchip Bioreactors have been identified as a valuable nutrient management tool by functioning to remove nitrates from tile drainage water before it moves downstream. And the district partnered with Illinois and Mchenry County Farm Bureaus and the University of Illinois to install a woodchip bioreactor at our Queen Anne Prairie site in 2020. And the water quality monitoring was conducted by the district's volunteer stewards. And the preliminary data indicated an impressive reduction in the nitrate concentrations. It was more than 50% removed from water flowing into the bioreactor and flowing out. So we're really excited by these preliminary results, and we're currently in discussion with U of I about how to build on these efforts in other innovative ways. The district also provides a native seed planting service for private landowners who may not have access to the proper equipment for planting native seed mixes for CRP or field borders or something like that. We use a Vicon pendulum seeder, and we've had really good success with that. And so this is a fairly new service that we're offering, and if it's something that interests you, feel free to contact me for more information. The district requires 30-foot field borders on all ag fields and 65-foot filter strips along waterways adjacent to ag fields. These provide critically important functions not only for natural resources, but for farmland as well. Field borders effectively filter runoff, contribute to groundwater recharge, and provide flood mitigation from severe storm events. They can also function as living snow fences and provide habitat for wildlife. And we've seen firsthand the impacts to wildlife when the filter strips are not properly maintained. Surveys conducted by the district's wildlife biologists have shown that filter strips have a direct impact on freshwater mussel populations. Mussels are the best indicator of water quality that we have in our streams. So this is a parcel along Lawrence Creek, and it had been in row crops for decades with extremely narrow filter strips, sometimes as narrow as just a couple of feet, before the district purchased it in 1995. Once the district took ownership, the filter strips were expanded to 200 feet to protect the Piscataquis to the west and Lawrence Creek to the east. Preliminary mussel surveys after acquisition showed little to no living mussels. In 1999, there were 2 live mussels found, and in 2005, 0 live mussels were found. The next mussel survey was in 2012, and at that time, 199 live mussels of 8 different species were found, including several young mussels, which indicated active recruitment in the population. Then in 2014, there was a miscommunication with the farmer that was leasing the parcel, which resulted in the filter strips being reduced to less than 50 feet. And then by 2018, the filter strips were only 30 feet. And a mussel survey in 2018 using the same protocols as 2012 saw a 53% reduction in the number of live mussels from the previous survey. So after that incident, the district made a change to all farm leases, requiring a minimum of 65-foot filter strips next to streams. Field borders and filter strips not only serve to protect water quality, but they also provide valuable habitat for wildlife. Our field borders, filter strips, and hay fields make up more than 2,000 acres, and most of these are planted with native prairie seed, which benefits many mammals, birds, and insects. Our Joint Grassland Venture program sets restrictions on sites that have been identified as high-quality habitat for grassland birds, while continuing to provide hay to local producers, as well as managing brush and woody encroachment. By delaying the cutting date, grassland birds have a higher chance of producing a successful nest and fledging their young. Grassland bird surveys conducted by our wildlife biologists have shown that our most at-risk species, which include bobolinks and grasshopper sparrows, they need large open grassland habitat, and their populations respond positively to late-season haying. Last summer, we discovered even crop residue and ag weeds can provide nesting cover for birds, which was interesting to see. But birds aren't the only beneficiaries of ground cover in ag fields. We've seen all kinds of wildlife in and alongside the district's farmland. Last year, we began a partnership with Rooter Bison, who's raising bison at Pleasant Valley Conservation Area, and Liberty Prairie Foundation was instrumental in connecting us with the Rooters, which developed into a successful match for the district to begin a bison grazing initiative. As a native species, bison played a keystone role in the ecology of prairies and grasslands, and they evolved with this ecosystem. Their grazing preferences and wallowing behavior creates diversity in the structure and species composition of grasslands, which is important for wildlife. Our bison and cattle grazers use rotational grazing to benefit the soil and vegetation for grassland birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. Because of the ecological benefits, we are exploring how to expand opportunities for grazing on the district farm sites. Starting next year, we will be implementing new pesticide use restrictions in our ag leases. Specifically, we will be restricting the use of dicamba and neonicotinoid seed treatments on soybean seed and promoting the use of specialized seed lubricants. Dicamba use has increased dramatically since the introduction of dicamba-resistant crops in 2017, and it's highly prone to volatilization, potentially threatening non-target plants, which has led to record levels of pesticide drift complaints in Illinois and across the Midwest. Some of the district's farm operators have experienced damage to their soybeans due to suspected dicamba drift. However, we're also concerned about damage that can occur to oaks and other native species. The majority of our farmland is adjacent to natural areas which have been restored or are home to endangered, threatened, or rare species. So we want to do everything we can to protect these valuable natural habitats. Neonicotinoids are the most widely used class of insecticides in the US, if not the world, and they're most commonly applied as seed treatments. Neonics are systemic insecticides, so they're taken up through the roots and translocated to the leaves, flowers, and even pollen of the plant. And their widespread use has resulted in detections on non-target organisms and in the environment. Even though neonics are active in plant tissue of targeted crops for only a few weeks, residue from seed treatments can be released as dust during planting. It can leach into the soil or water runoff. And those residues have highly variable breakdown rates. Those breakdown rates can vary based on pH, UV exposure, and temperature. And exposure to this insecticide has negative implications for the health of pollinators, earthworms, and other invertebrates, as well as animals that rely on them as a food source. There has been some confusion about the district's new lease term, so I want to clarify that the restriction on neonics pertains only to soybean seed treatments. And the district, as I mentioned, will be promoting the use of seed lubricants specifically designed to reduce the amount of seed treatment dust released during planting. Planter dust can contain concentrations of insecticides and can move beyond field margins to settle on flowers and other vegetation in the field borders, potentially exposing non-target insects to these chemicals in our farm conservation areas and high-value habitats. Many of our producers use talc and graphite. However, fluency agent and dust are newer seed lubricants on the market that are designed to reduce the release of dust during planting. Looking ahead, the farm program is moving toward incorporating more practices that will promote soil health and water infiltration. We're interested in implementing new strategies to support beginning and young farmers, as well as alternative agriculture. We recently accepted a bid for our first organic farm lease. This is a pilot program that will allow us to assess the effects of organic practices on soil health. As I mentioned, we're also looking to expand livestock integration on our farmland. We currently have 2 grazing leases and are hoping to grow this initiative. Perhaps some of you also have ideas about how we can explore innovation in agriculture, so we're open to new ideas and partnerships. And lastly, we're monitoring the carbon market and exploring how we can collaborate with our producers and partners to participate in a mutually beneficial way. We would not be able to accomplish many of the projects mentioned today without our partners. some of which are in the audience today. So I want to thank all of those who have helped us along the way. And if we have time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you. I have a question about your margins and buffer strips, specifically with native plantings. So one, is there a certain height that you find is more effective? Like, can you do a 2-foot meadow mix, native seed planting mix in those buffers and find that as effective as some of the taller mixes? And then also, do you find that the native prairie plants have a greater water quality benefit than some of the other grass buffers? Or is that kind of interchangeable and it's mostly just like the wildlife benefits with that?
Yeah, good question. In terms of water quality benefits and height of the grasses, I don't think it really matters. Just having that permanent cover to filter surface water runoff and absorb any or infiltrate any water is going to be beneficial. But I do think the native seed, the native flowers or grasses are going to have a higher benefit for wildlife.
So like your soil quality initiative and your soil testing,
Mm-hmm.
you share that with your tenants currently?
Do I share? Yes.
So they get to see all that?
So any soil testing that we have done, we send directly to our tenants. If you don't have it from me, I will send it to you. We are on a 4-year cycle, so this is the 4th year this fall, so there's a small subset of our farmland that hasn't been tested yet. I'll have to check with you on whether our land that you lease has been tested.
What is the frequency with which you do the soil testing to measure the change and how often that occurs? And then do you have a particular lab that you find is more reliable?
That is a good question.
Brenna, a little closer to the mic.
Okay. So the way it's worked out in terms of budgeting, our frequency for soil testing, which started in 2019, that was the first time that the district started testing our farm parcels ourselves. The way it worked out, we're on a 4-year cycle, doing a subset of the farmland every year. And then in terms of the labs, we've used 2 different labs, so I will say we're kind of learning as we go still on the soil testing stuff. I know producers have been soil testing for a very long time, and what I've learned recently is that it's far more beneficial to use the same lab year after year. The labs that we've used are Midwest, or A&L Great Lakes labs, and I blank on the second one. Do you remember? Yeah. But it's better if you use one lab year after year.
In regards to y'all's wildlife program, I love that y'all do that. 100% support of trying to, help the wildlife around the farms flourish. But you're also going to promote some pest species, coyotes, raccoons, possums, and so I'm starting a watermelon patch in Alabama this year. It's a bigger problem down there with my watermelons than it is up here with monoculture, soybeans and stuff. But will y'all do anything to help farmers with like wildlife management for pest problems that might come about from that?
With regard to our farmland, pest problems on farmland?
Right. Yeah, because with the wider swaths of buffer zone and everything. Yeah, I saw a picture of a garter snake up there, but I'm sure there's some poisonous species as well. Yeah, you'll have unwanted stuff come in along with the wanted wildlife. Is there anything, will y'all work with the farmers to, try to help mitigate that?
I haven't had to contend with any wildlife pest issues since I came on in May. I don't know if Brad has dealt with any of those issues in the past.
I just think of you get, I don't know, coyote coming into the yard now that you've got a good established buffer zone, gets the pet, or a rattlesnake winds up on the carport.
Sure. Yeah, we don't have any rattlesnakes
Okay.
that we know of, but we actually have a deer hunting program, so we do manage deer. I know they can be crop damage. Also beaver, so we do nuisance wildlife renewals when necessary, but our farmers they would let us know if there's damage going on, but we don't have a lot of specialty crops that you're talking about, but probably deer is the biggest one, and we do have a pretty extensive hunting program.
Cool. Thank you.
You just mentioned beaver. You do trap beaver? Oh, yeah, because they're a real pain. The variable lease formula for land leases, is that available on your website, the details of that?
Not directly on our website. It is explained or sort of laid out on any open farm bids. So if we have an open bid, which we don't at this moment in time, but it will be explained in our farm policy that's always included with the bid, as well as on the bid application form. But if that's something you want more information about, I'm happy to send you more information or talk with you later.
Yeah, my question was specifically about beaver dams, and do you ever have any issues with your tenants and having the fields being flooded by the beaver dams, and how do you deal with that?
We do have that issue. I might have to call on Brad to answer that one. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, we do get that, and I see Dan was waving his hand. We are notified, and a lot of times you don't know about it until it has occurred. So, the farmer's not out there checking the field. All of a sudden in the fall, it's flooding. So we do find out by farmers mostly, and then we do go in and remove the beaver if they're causing damage from, flooding crops, things like that.
I had two questions. When the farmer, especially if they're row crops, when they're renting the ground, are they charged for the entire parcel or just their productive ground? The second question is, how did the district eliminate the upstream possible causes for the mussel drop?
Repeat that last question for me.
You showed a significant drop in the mussel count, and you attributed it to the filters, the filter strip change. I was wondering how you ruled out any upstream causes.
I didn't catch Dan's comment, but
Or animal causes.
Oh, for like predation or something like that. Well, I don't know the answer to the mussel question, but I will say that the farmer only pays for the tillable acres, not the field borders or anything that's not crops grown on.
How do you grid sample your soil testing, and how deep are your soil tests? I mean, in what depth do you go to the soil test? And then when you clean out those beaver traps, do you vacate the water, or do you vacate the canal or the stream of trees, or you just vacate areas where the beaver are at?
All right, there's, I think, 3 questions there, and I've forgotten the first 2. Can you repeat?
Oh, the grid.
Oh,
grid
yes,
and how
yes.
deep.
Yeah, we do grid sample. It's 5-acre grids on fields that are less than 100 acres, I believe. Or is it 2.5? 2.5, okay. 5-acre grids on fields that are larger than 100 acres. And I don't know the answer to how deep the soil probes are because we're not the one taking the samples.
To what depth do you test?
Oh, what do you
yeah.
test for?
Okay, so we do a basic soil analysis, so it covers all of the micronutrients and basic soil tests for the grid sampling. We have been also doing a Haney soil test on a single sample, not a grid sample per field. And then, again, I might need.
Do you vacate the canal of all the trees in the water, or do you just vacate it of the area there where the beavers are?
Do you mean down trees?
Yes.
I suspect that it's just the Beaver Dam issue, not every down tree in the stream. Well, it depends on the beaver activity, I think, more so. I don't think a single tree laying in a stream necessarily will dam the stream unless it attracts beaver activity.
To your comment, Tim, while that tree's laying in that ditch, the water's being forced around it, so we're carving out the ditch bank, contributing to more problems in the ditch.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
On your what's next slide, it said that you mentioned you're looking to support beginning and young farmers. I was just wondering the specifics on how you're doing that.
That's a good question as well. That is a developing process. So it's a conversation we will be having in the near future about how to create better opportunity for bidding on our leases for young and beginning farmers. So we have a good number of beginning and young farmers that do lease from us already, but it's something we want to more strictly define in our lease process. So that's a next step for us.
One quick last question.
As far as the woodchip bioreactor, do you think cover crop would help mussel population? Yeah.
I think cover crops help lots of things like water infiltration. If you're having more water infiltrate rather than run off, then you're benefiting lots of things, wildlife, mussels included.
Well, the reason I asked, I have about a 4-acre pond, and the past couple of years, especially this summer, I cannot believe how many mussels we have. I've never changed the border. I probably got 15, 20 feet of border around it before the fields. The only difference is I've been doing cover crop the past 7 or 8 years. So I was wondering why I have so many mussels, and when you mentioned that, I figured I'd ask.
Do you also have field borders or?
Yeah, I have probably 15, 20 feet around the pond that I just mow grass. It's just grass, you know.
Well, that's anecdotal, but I think that it could very well be a contributing factor.
But I've always had that 15, 20 feet.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I'm just like, well, why do I have so many mussels now?
Yeah.
So thank you.
I don't think it's hurting anything by any means.
Well, thank you, Brenna. Are you going to stick around so if they have additional questions during lunch, they can seek you out?
You bet.
Okay.
Okay, our next session is on funding opportunities through local and federal agencies. I will speak on our local cost share programs, and then we'll also hear from Eleanor Schumacher, Amy Collins, and Emmy Brawley on some of the federal programming that's available. And we'll try to save questions till after all of us have given our presentations. For those of you who do not know me, I received my degree in watershed management and soil science from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And 23 years ago, fresh out of college, the Mchenry Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District hired me on as their resource analyst. At the time, I was doing mostly urban programming and a lot of education work in the schools, which included developing a soils trailer that I took around to the various 4th and 5th grade classes out there and taught them hands-on soils activities. But job titles change, job duties change, soil trailers break down. So now I am the executive director and have been in that role since 2020. And I'd also like to introduce our kind of newer employee. That is Ryan Bieber, if Ryan can stand up. He does a lot of our urban erosion control inspections, but he will also be helping with our cost share programs this year. He is very new to this, so if you have any questions, don't pepper him yet. He will get up to speed by the time our sign up happens, but I just wanted to make sure you knew what his face looked like. Okay. Now, how many of you are from other counties other than Lake and Mchenry? Can you raise your hands? Okay, what I am going to go through is the cost share programs that we have available through the state of Illinois. It is available to every district in the state. Each district has the opportunity to set their own cost share rate. They cannot exceed 75%, and they can pick which practices they want to prioritize for funding. Our board in Mchenry and Lake has decided that they're going to fund it at the maximum. So we will provide up to 75% of the cost share of that established average cost or the cost of the project, whichever is lower, okay? You have to come up with that additional 25%. You cannot couple this with any other programs. The state wants to make sure you kind of have some skin in the game, so they want you to pay for that 25%. Also, this is reimbursable, so you have to pay for all the project up front, you submit your receipts, and we certify your project, and then we pay that 75% to you. Okay, so that's how the program works. Now, hopefully all of you received a packet out front at the table, looks something like this. That has all of our cost share practices in there, okay? I'm not going through the whole list. I'm just gonna highlight a few of them. So if you're interested in any of those practices, the average costs are in there, and also if there's any maintenance requirements or if there's any caps for payments, that is in there as well, okay? I do wanna highlight, though, a few of them. And the first one would be our conservation cover, which is for our pollinator species. And this was added to our cost share program about 2 years ago. And we're able to cost share up to 10 acres. There is no minimum, but the maximum is 10. And then the average cost for a new establishment of those pollinator species is almost $900. And then if you have habitat already established and you'd like to interseed it with some pollinator species, we can cost share up to $215. Additionally, if you are conventionally tilling your fields right now and would like to move to a no-till or strip-till system, we can provide up to $30 an acre for you to transition. And there is a $3,200 maximum on that program, and it has to be on ground that has never had no-till or strip-till utilized on it before. And it also must be going to either corn or sorghum, okay? Additionally, we can help cover those costs of establishing those cover crops. Again, it has to be on new acres, so they want to see new practices established throughout the state. So we can provide up to 40 acres maximum, or $40 an acre maximum, and then there's also a $3,200 program maximum as well, which is double from what we had before. So basically, you can cost share about 80 acres worth of cover crops through our program. It all really depends on which species you choose. The average cost for winter kill is around $46, and then for your basic cover crop that you have to terminate in the springtime, their average cost is $70. So we'd pay up to 75% of that, or as long as you're under that $40 maximum. Some other things that we can cost share, well decommissioning. So if you have an abandoned well on one of your farmsteads and would like to have that safely decommissioned, we can help you with that. And we can provide up to $400 for a hand-dug well or $750 for a drilled well. So keep that in mind. The next 3 items we can cost share, but it's really low on our priority list because they're so expensive to establish, and it basically would wipe out all of our cost share funds. So we want to make sure we kind of spread the wealth around. But if you're interested, we can cost share on constructed wetlands, bioreactors, and drainage water management. I can get you at least on the list, and if any county throughout the state does not use their cost share funding, we can ask for those additional funds to try to fund your project. We can also do saturated buffers and then grass waterways as well. That grass waterway rate depends on the width of the waterway, if you're going to have any checks in there, so do you have any rock checks, fabric checks, also the time of year that you establish that waterway. So if you do it during the growing season, we're actually going to pay you more to not crop a certain area so that we can make sure that that waterway establishes during the growing season. And then for our kind of urbanized areas, we also offer rain gardens assistance. Another program that the state has is our Stream Bank Stabilization Program. Unfortunately, this is not funded very well, so statewide there's only $100,000 available, so there's kind of a backlog of projects right now. But if you are interested, we can get you on the list, and then hopefully as the years go on, you'll move up that list. But we can pay for 75% of kind of that hardscape stuff, so your stone toe protection, your stream barbs, your bendway weirs, and your rock riffles. If you happen to have a project that is shovel-ready and you've had the engineering already completed, there's a chance that we can convert additional money to Stream Bank and get that project funded faster because the state does not have to hire their own engineers to design a project. Okay, the next slide is our application, which is in your packets as well. Very simple application. I just need to know your contact information. If you're renting the land, I need to know their information as well. I need your farm, track numbers. I need copies of an FSA aerial with the area where the practice is outlined on that aerial photograph. And then also, I need a little bit of cropping history. So what those last 4 years of your crops were, how much residue was left, your tillage methods, et cetera. I need to do a few soil calculations to make sure you qualify. So I just need that information. And we will be taking applications March 15th through April 15th. And I did put that date on top of the application so you can remember. So if you're interested, make sure you go ahead and apply right away. Now, if you do get accepted, you do have to fill out a STAR field form. How many of you have heard of the STAR program? Hopefully everyone by now. Okay, STAR, Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. And basically, it's just a quick way to evaluate how you're doing nutrient management-wise and soil health-wise on your parcel, okay? And so basically, what you fill out, you're going to be asked what your conservation management practices are. Do you have any waterways? Do you have any saturated buffers? They're also going to ask you about your crop rotation history for the last 5 years. And then also, have you utilized any cover crops? They'll also ask you questions about your tillage practices, and also if you've been soil sampling and how you do those soil samples. And then lastly, they're going to ask you about your nutrient management activities. Now, when you turn that in, that form will be scored. You're going to either receive positive points or negative points, depending on what practices you use on your field. And then you're going to be, that score will be put into categories 1 through 5. 1 meaning you've got some work to do. 5 meaning you're doing a great job. Maybe there's some places where you can improve, but generally you're doing very well on your conservation and minimizing the nutrients leaving your field. Okay, you can do that. You can fill out that form anytime. You do not have to just wait until you apply for a program. That form's available. I did include a copy of the 2021 form in your packets. The 2022 form has not come out yet, but when it does, if you want a copy and want to evaluate one of your fields, just let me know and I can send it to you. There's also an online tool that they have where you can fill all that information out online. And that information is private. We do not share it with anyone. All right, like I said, our application period is March 15th through April 15th. So if you are interested, please fill out an application. And if you have any questions about any of the practices or the cost sharing rates, feel free to get a hold of me. I left my business cards out on the table, so make sure you grab one of those. Email is the easiest way to get a hold of me. So make sure you just send me a quick message and I'll get right back to you. All right, our next speaker is Eleanor. I have Eleanor Schumacher. Let me find your bio here. Eleanor is a Southern Illinois pollination ecologist. She holds 2 positions with the Pollinator Partnership, working as an Illinois State Coordinator for Project Wingspan and an NRCS liaison. She also works as an apiary inspector with the Illinois Department of Agriculture. Fascinated by the correlation between pollinator habitat quality and bee health, she pursued studies in pollination ecology and received a master's degree in natural resource and environmental sciences from the University of Illinois in 2018. She worked as a resource conservationist for the Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District from 2017 through 2019. She has 3 small prairie restorations of her own and 25 beehives. She and her husband call their farm the land of milk and honey because he's a dairy farmer milking 75 cows twice a day. Please welcome Eleanor.
Thanks, Spring. I'm going to move this. Yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks, Spring. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. It's an honor. And this is a wonderful turnout. It's really exciting. So I have front-loaded my presentation with a lot of science. So I'm going to do the auctioneer version of this science. I'm going to rifle through some numbers fast. And if I see people's heads nodding, I'm going to go even faster, okay? So yes, I work for Pollinator Partnership. And yes, the land of milk and honey, my husband milking cows, myself raising bees, and working in apiary inspection for Department of Agriculture. So I consider myself a gig economy conservation worker, working off the farm so I don't have to milk cows alongside my husband. Oops, trying to figure out how the layout of this. Well, I'm just going to jump right ahead. Kind of need to figure out a cursor. Find my cursor. Here it is. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. So we know pollinators are in trouble, but how bad is it? What's actually happening? I'm going to rifle through these studies to show you the body of science that explains the importance of pollinators and the severity of pollinator decline. So hold on to your seats. This part is really exciting. Over the past 35 years, agricultural and natural resource agencies have noticed a rapid decline of pollinators due to several causes, such as land use intensification, pesticide use, climate change, exotic and invasive species competition, and the spread of pests and diseases. Here's a poster put together by the Xerces Society that breaks it down pollinator by pollinator. I feel like I'm getting a lot of pea popping, so I want to move this away. It doesn't need to be so close. So we've had a 28% bumblebee decline. 19% of butterflies are at risk of extinction. 50% of leafcutter bee species are at risk. 27% of mason bee species are at risk. And 27 species of non-native lady beetles threaten our native beetles. Put this together with USDA resources that report numerous species of butterflies and moths and native bees are either extremely rare or extinct, and we realize we have a real problem on our hands. But how much do these beneficial insects really matter to our world and society? It's taken decades of research to actually identify the value of pollinators to human life. The research is ongoing. A focus on food security is key to helping the world understand what's at stake. These are figures that researchers agree on. 75% of global food crops depend on pollinators. 1 out of 3 bites of food that we eat are because a pollinator visited a flower. Declines in production are associated with pollinator decline. So I'm confused about my slides. So this is a series that was done by Whole Foods and the Xerces Society through the Share the Buzz campaign. And it shows your produce choices with bees and your produce choices without bees. That is a really impactful vision of how we need pollinators to eat. So now get ready for some more exciting science. Here's just a few studies that have shown what's at stake. A 1994 study showed 84% of European crops depend on animal pollination. A 2003 study broke down the economic worth of honeybee pollination and native bee pollination to U.S. agriculture. The estimated $6.8 billion were attributed to honeybee pollination and $3.1 billion to native bees. A 2008 study estimated global crop production from insect pollination was worth $217 billion. And now this study published last year, the study that gives us this county by county map, it shows the counties most vulnerable based on the type of pollinator-mediated foods they produce, but also based on the scale of pollinator decline in that region. Most vulnerable, in first place, counties producing fruit and nuts. You see the dark spots on the west coast. In second place, counties producing melons and vegetables. Do you know any counties producing melons or vegetables? In third place, counties producing oilseed like canola and soybeans. Now can you think of any counties? You'll see Illinois has color. Illinois is the #1 state for pumpkin export, and of course, a big soybean exporter. But we have extremely low acreage of pollinator habitat and steep pollinator decline, so that makes our production vulnerable to pollinator loss. But does this really matter to you personally? How does this apply to your farm? Sure, my farm is a dairy farm, and we grow alfalfa. Bees pollinate alfalfa, but guess what? Bees can make a difference to your soybeans. And soybeans can be a great nectar source for bees. Several common varieties of beans yield nectar for honey and for bees. So here's some science on that. This is the last science I'll have in my talk. This study found soybean yields were significantly increased by honeybees and wild bees. Soybean yields were between 6 and 18% higher with bees. This 2017 study found honeybees increased soybean yield by 18%. And just published last year is an extensive review of all the studies investigating the influence of pollinators on self-pollinating crops like soybeans, cotton, coffee, and canola. It showed benefits from native bees and called for more study. So finally, a 2014 study tips off the benefits of adding prairies to farm margins. This study looked at native bees on canola in Manitoba. They suggested growing wildflowers adjacent to canola field margins to increase canola yields. They found the system of pollination significantly strengthened with benefits to the crops when pollinator habitat was planted nearby. This study highlights an extremely important concept, that pollination is a system that revolves around diverse populations of native bees and native wildflowers, all benefiting from each other. Put these studies together with studies that show how pollinator habitat incorporated into cropland can make on-farm improvements, and we have new methods of conservation. We have a new conservation practice that has several applications for row crop farms. Prairie strips, also known as CP43, made their debut in 2017. A now famous prairie strip study from from Iowa State University showed amazing benefits from planting pollinator habitat on farms, a real winner. Here's a look at the results. 44% reduction in water runoff, 95% reduction in soil loss, that's huge, 90% reduction in the phosphorus runoff, 84% reduction in nitrate nitrogen runoff. No difference in per acre corn and soybean yields, and weed abundance did not increase. Now that's all great news, but if you were disappointed reading that there was no difference in soybean yields, it's not bad news. It shows that incorporating pollinator habitat into crop fields didn't reduce yields. That's a positive. So how do you get started? Visit your local USDA field office and schedule time with a conservation planner. You can identify exactly what problems you're having on your fields and where, and how much field it makes sense to convert. Let's see. Yes, and also plan for strategic prairie strip placement. They're not really unlike terraces, the way you would place them through your field. Usually they're 30 feet wide and perpendicular to water courses. You'll have to follow established USDA guidelines. Your conservation planner will make sure your seed mix is properly designed and meets all the standards and specs. A minimum of 10 native flowering plants is required for CP43. At least 2 species will be blooming for each bloom period. That's mid, late, and early flowering seasons. After you broadcast your seeds, mowing is critical for a successful prairie establishment. In the first year, prairie roots are growing down while the weeds are growing up. So mowing's really the key to success. Year 1, every time weeds are knee-high, mow the prairie down 4 to 6 inches. Most people have to do this 3 to 4 times in that first season. Year 2, you mow down to 8 to 10 inches 2 to 3 times that season. And then year 3, you've got options. You could spot treat your weeds and shrubs with herbicides, or you could do a controlled burn. A little bit about prescribed burning. This is great prairie management. Not just because it's the most effective, but because it's really fun, especially when you take a course, get certified to burn, and do it with others. So this picture was taken at home in Pocahontas. This is my friend Larry, the master naturalist. This was him at the beginning of his first burn at my prairie back in 2020. You see him outside wearing a mask with a tiny fire, playing it super safe. Safety is important. Here's Larry at his second burn about a week later. He's really getting into it. It was hard to stop him, actually. But we had a burn plan. So don't burn your prairie without a burn plan, and your USDA field office, they'll help you with that. Prescribed burning isn't the only way to manage a prairie, but it helps increase the vigor of the prairie. It helps control non-desired species, and it helps the flowers get better established by removing the thatch. Prairies are a very rewarding conservation practice. Installing CP43 prairie strips can not only address soil erosion and improve water quality, it can restore ecological heritage to your farm. That's something to be proud of and enjoy in your heart and soul. I sure do. If you'd like to talk more about pollinators and pollinator habitat, please don't be shy. Pollinator Partnership is the non-for-profit organization that I work with, and we have all kinds of programs and opportunities to save pollinators. Here's a visual glance at some of the many projects and resources we offer. Bee-friendly farming, that green logo right there, is a great program. If anyone's interested in becoming a bee-friendly farmer, please come talk to me. It's not hard. My husband and I are bee-friendly farmers. It's sort of second nature. So please do visit your local USDA Service Center to learn more about pollinator habitat for your farm. If you want to help pollinators even more, Pollinator Partnership can complement your involvement in USDA programs by certifying your farm as a bee-friendly farm. And if you like visiting prairies and you want to learn more about seeds and help improve pollinator habitat in Illinois, you can help me by getting involved with Project Wingspan. I'm seeking seed collection volunteers and prairies where we can collect native wildflower seeds for the 2022 season. The seeds we collect, we award to local pollinator habitat projects. If you apply for one, you might get one of our awards. It's a labor of love and it's a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Oh, I wanted to mention, Ben Klausing is a producer who's come today to show you his experience of putting in his CP43, and that's going to be a great presentation coming up in a little bit.
Thank you. All right, our next presenters are Amy Collins and Emmy Brawley. Amy is the Midwest Program Associate for the Conservation Fund, supporting the fund's suite of programs in Illinois. With 2 decades of experience in land conservation, ecological restoration, and community outreach, her role is to provide technical and real estate assistance for landowners, producers, and conservation partners working towards a sustainable future. Amy holds dual BA degrees from National Louis University and Prescott College. She lives near Woodstock with her husband and 2 dogs. And Emmy is the Illinois State Director and Great Lakes Regional Director for the Conservation Fund. As part of the fund's Midwest team, she serves as representative for the Metro Chicago region and beyond to help offer the full array of the fund's programs and services to its conservation partners. This includes strategic conservation planning, technical assistance, real estate services, and acquisition financing. Emmy is also responsible for the management of the fund's work to implement farmland protection programs in Wisconsin and Michigan. Emmy holds a BA and JD from the University of Colorado. Welcome, Amy and Emmy. Or just Amy.
Good morning, everyone. I actually think Emmy may have gotten held up in the snow. I don't know if she's here with us. So I think it's just me. Nice to see all of you. Great to be here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a cost share assistance opportunity that's open right now for landowners and producers. It's called the Illinois Working Lands Water and Wildlife Conservation Partnership, although I will be referring to it by its short name, RCPP 1910. So this is a partnership that's supported by NRCS's Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. This is a program in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's focused on bringing cost share assistance, again, to landowners and producers, and really helping NRCS extend its effectiveness, its reach, and its ability to deliver its programs and services. The Conservation Fund is the lead partner on this, so we work closely with the state and local NRCS staff to deliver and administer RCPP 1910. We've also got a lot of other great partners. Some of them are in the room today working on this project with us to deliver it to people on the ground. And the Conservation Fund might not be familiar to some of you. We're actually a national organization. Our headquarters are in Arlington, Virginia, but we have field offices all over the country, and our Illinois field office is actually here in McHenry County, where I work. We were founded in 1985, and we really function as a real estate and conservation finance shop, bringing resources to partners on the ground to help them do great projects. We're focused on a dual mission, which is a little unique among many conservation organizations. We want to do projects that have a dual benefit for the environment, as well as sustainable economic development. We've protected more than 8 million acres since 1985, and about a third of that is what we like to call working lands, right? Farms, ranches, and working forests. So what's the point of RCPP 1910? Well, what we're trying to do here is bring resources to farmers who are working towards a new integrated vision of agriculture in Illinois. And that's a vision that focuses on environmental protections, as we've been talking today in many of the presentations, but also supports strong and diverse farm businesses for economic benefit and for our agricultural legacy. So the activities that I'm going to talk about that are available for people to partake in RCPP 1910 are really focused around 3 critical natural resource concerns, specifically inadequate wildlife habitat, lack of quality habitat, lack of interconnectivity between habitat areas. We're also focused on water quality, specifically around field sediment, nutrient, and pathogen loss. And then we're also focused on the long-term protection of farmland. And for context to that, Illinois, as we all know well, is one of the most farmland-rich places in the entire world. But we also have urban areas in particular where a lot of farmland has been converted to non-agricultural uses over the last 30-some years. So what we want to focus on with that last goal is to build a strong, viable base of productive farmland so that we have places to grow the food and the agricultural products that we need in the future. So RCPP 1910 is covering a pretty good portion of the state and a large chunk of northern Illinois. You can see McHenry County is covered here, as well as a number of our surrounding counties. And this is a program that's going to be offering cost share assistance through 2025. So if you're not able to apply this year or need to wait a little bit, you'll be able to apply in the next few years too. All right, so how does this work? Well, RCPP projects involve a few things. First off, they're voluntary conservation actions, and they take place on privately owned working lands. And again, they're focused on addressing those 3 specific natural resource concerns I mentioned: habitat, farmland protection, and water quality. We also have our eye on some other priorities that we think are going to make really great RCPP 1910 projects, and that includes projects that we can do on farms that are near waterways or contain streams, creeks, portions of rivers, and are near existing natural areas. And that's a way to maximize those goals for habitat and for water quality by focusing on those sites with those resources. And then also we're focused on projects that are going to bring these RCPP resources to farmers and landowners who have been traditionally underserved. And we're using the USDA definition of historically underserved here, which includes beginning farmers, farmers considered to be currently or traditionally socially disadvantaged or limited resource, and then veteran farmers who are returning to farming or starting farming after their service. All right, So I'm going to talk about the activities that are covered in RCPP 1910. We don't have a lot of time to go over these today, but I'm always available for a conversation about your unique situation, and I'll give you my contact information at the end here. So the first activity that's in this addresses that concern about long-term farmland protection. And this is for landowners who have farmland and are interested in protecting it long-term with a tool called a conservation easement. I know that a lot of people in this room are familiar with conservation easements. In case that's a new term for you, though, it's essentially acting like a deed restriction. A conservation easement for agricultural land is going to limit the types of non-agricultural development activities that can be done on that property. And then that's recorded to the deed of the property, which means it's going to permanently protect the farmland by transferring when the land is sold or passed down to an heir in the future. So in this RCPP project, you can get technical and cost share assistance to put an easement on your farmland. Couple of important things to know about that as the landowner. This is just attached to the deed. It's just talking about development activities or development rights. You still own the land. You still have control of the land. But what's really attractive to people that are working with us in this part of the RCPP project right now is that there is a chunk of cash coming your way out of it. You'll get a large chunk of cash potentially out of the sale of the easement, and that's yours to do whatever you need to do with it. So some of the farmers that we're working with are reinvesting that back into their businesses or buying additional land, which is helpful. We also have land rental incentives. So these are activities that both landowners and operators and producers who are renting land can partake in. We'll provide cost share assistance to support different farm transitions, for example, transitioning to certified organic production, installing perennial cropping systems, and so on. You can receive up to 3 years of land rental payments at a current rate of $200 an acre, and that's intended to offset the lost income that come for those transitions. Lastly, there's our land management activities. Again, these are available to landowners and to operators who are renting land, and you can receive technical and cost share assistance to implement different NRCS conservation practices on your land. So the way that works is you'll work with your local NRCS staff to develop a conservation plan or maybe update a plan if you've already got one. And then you can apply to receive this cost share support to implement one or more different practices on your land. These are practices that can help you improve the conservation benefits of your land, but also do some infrastructure improvement as well. We currently have 49 practices, and this is a long list, but if you go out to the registration desk, we have a stack of flyers there for this program that has all of these listed there, so feel free to grab one of those. But you can see that these are covering a wide variety of activities, and some of them might be of use to you, so take a flyer and bring it home and consider that. So one of the questions we often get when we talk about this project and opportunity is, am I going to be eligible for this? What does it mean to partake in it? So your project site for any of those activities that I just discussed will have to have an FSA farmer track number. It needs to currently be producing agricultural products in some fashion. And as I mentioned, a couple of these activities are open to folks renting land for their operations, but the easements are specific to landowners because obviously you need to make decisions about your land. If you want to participate, you'll work directly with your district conservationist at your local NRCS service center to submit an application. They'll go through that process with you. They'll walk you through it, make sure that it gets submitted for you. This is a competitive pool, but one of the interesting and good things about this RCPP is we actually have a narrower list of activities and practices that are covered by it than, say, EQIP covering the entire state. So you're actually going to be competing against fewer people because there's a smaller group of activities to partake in. So this is a really great way to try to get your hands on some of this federal money that's available. The applications will go into ranking batches, and then NRCS will pick the ones that will be selected for funding, but we think there's a good rate of most people getting funding out of this. So you can get started today, talk to me. You can reach out to your local district conservationist. They're all trained and ready to take applications. They're doing it right now. You can apply anytime. But again, these are going to be batched and ranked twice a year, and our upcoming cutoff date for the first batch is coming up really fast on March 4th. You can get an application in for that first batch up into March 4th, and if you submit on the 5th or after, you'll automatically be rolled into the fall batching. And I just want to mention briefly another program that the Conservation Fund offers here in Metro Chicago, and that's our Working Farms Fund. This is an effort to create better affordability and access to farmland, particularly for beginning and new farmers who are ready to scale up from 2 or 5 acres to 20 acres or more. This is a model that we use where the Conservation Fund purchases a farm, working closely with a farmer to meet their needs, and then we lease to own it to the farmer, protecting it with a conservation easement along the way. And what that conservation easement does is actually removes the development rights and lowers the price of the farm, sometimes by 20 or even 30%. And then we're able to sell it at that agricultural value to the farmer. So if this interests you, you can go to this website here, workingfarmsfund.org, or again, reach out and we can discuss your particular situation. And there's our contact information there. I'm sorry Emmy wasn't able to join us today, but we're available anytime. Bring your situation to us. Let's talk about some projects, and we hope to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I think we're going to skip questions for now, so if you have any questions for Eleanor, Amy, or myself, please track us down during lunch, and we'd be happy to speak with you. So just in an effort to keep things moving along and make sure we get to lunch on time, we're going to move on to our next session. And this is the last one before lunch, and it's one I'm personally looking forward to. And this is our producer highlights. We invited 3 local producers to speak on their experiences with our groups in establishing conservation practices. We'll hear from Cody Book, Alan Ainger, and Ben Klossing. Cody is the co-owner of Book Cattle and Grain. He currently farms with his family in Harvard, Illinois area. They raise corn, soybeans, wheat, hay, and rye. They also feed cattle from 400 pounds to finish. And to diversify their portfolio, they conduct seed sales, crop protection sales, and tractor part sales. Cody's family just celebrated their centennial year farming at their current locations on Bunker Hill Road, and they run ground from Winnebago County through Boone County and end up between Crystal Lake and Woodstock. Alan Ainger is the owner of the Ainger Farm LLC. Alan is a 4th-generation dairy farmer who also produces hay, corn, and soybeans. His operation is located north of Alden, Illinois, directly on the state line. And Alan and his wife, Katie, have 3 children, ages 13, 11, and 9, and they're adorable. I've seen them all. Ben Klossing produces corn, soybeans, and wheat in southern Boone and Mchenry counties using primarily ridge-till and no-till practices. He and his wife, Jamie, have 4 sons, their most important crops. He has experimented with native plantings on his family's farmstead since 2014, and last year he installed 9.5 acres of the recently added CRP practice prairie strips along his field edges. So Cody, if you want to go first, and then we'll follow up with Alan and then Ben. So if you gentlemen want to make your way up here, and we'll have a time for questions for them when they're done presenting what they're going to present to us today. And I'm going to pull these chairs out so you guys have a place to sit, okay?
Good? I just had a few pictures, but I don't know where they're at.
So just hit that.
Next one, got it. Sorry. All right, guys, so obviously we know what these are. It's a radish and a tillage radish and a turnip. That'd be a purple top to be exact. So the reason we put these in on our farm is on our Class B and C soils. Okay. On our Class B and C soils, it builds soil tilth, it builds soil health, it holds everything in place, it grabs all the nutrients that we want it to grab and keeps it up where we want them instead of running to the bottom of the hill and or into the creek. We generally put these in using a method that would involve a vertical till, and we'll broadcast it and then hit it with a vertical till real light after a wheat crop comes off. We also fly some of them on into standing corn. That's a little bit newer thing that we've been playing with and had good luck with. but the corn, bean, wheat rotation has been extremely good on implementing this. Anything that's close to the home farm, like she said, we have livestock, we have cattle, we have manure. We compost that, and then we'll spread that on top of the wheat stubble, throw the cover crop on, vertical till it in, and get extremely lush vegetation. If you traveled up Route 47 between Woodstock and Huntley, you'd have seen some of it on some really tough ground between Woodstock and Huntley. I don't think I put pictures on of that, but the result is soil that held in place. I mean, it is extremely sandy on the one hill on the southwest corner of 47 and Lucas, and it is extremely steep angle, and it went nowhere. So, we were very happy with that and how it worked out, and we all know how dry it was this summer, and we still got it established. I mean, when these things get down and that root gets going, obviously you've got the tap off the bottom. It goes a lot longer than that. So they'll grab water a lot better than you think if you can just get them in the ground. That's a size like 2X glove for sake. And you can eat those. They are good if you ever want to pull one. So that's my younger brother. He's a lot bigger than I am, and you can see like that is a ridiculous tillage radish, and that's just one of many that was in one of those farms. Kind of some history on how long we've done those rotations with the corn, bean, wheat. We've got one farm in particular on what I would call Maringo Ridge, be north of Maringo Ridge Conservation District. That is, it's tough. And that farm, I think we're in our 4th rotation of that, so 12 years. And I'll put that against most black dirt in the county. It truly will produce if you continue with, if you don't have livestock, get your hands on some chicken litter or something. I shouldn't just say something. Horse manure, if they bed with wood shavings, is not a good option. You tie up things with wood shavings like nitrogen, which is why they use them in bioreactors. You don't really want to put that on your field. It's not going to be as beneficial. But, you truly can change a farm's production, and you truly can hold the soil in place with this stuff. Now, that being said, we also run some very flat black dirt. We don't use it on those acres. And the reason being is there is, contrary to what some people will tell you, there is yield drag on some of it. When this stuff decomposes, the radishes and turnips decompose before you get to them. We don't have the yield drag when we do that. We've done a lot of rye. We've done a lot of oats. Specifically this last year, anything with rye or oats, no matter how early you killed it, it sucked every last bit of moisture out of the ground, and you were left with a brick. Not only could you not no-till into that, you could not work it, vertical till it, strip till it, not doing a good job anyway. And those crops suffered immensely this year. I would argue that on a long-term scale, cover crops are very beneficial. Like I said, you can change a piece of farmland, you can make it better. But on a short term, every farm does not qualify, in my opinion, to run that across. So this is what it looks like when it starts to decompose in the winter or in the spring. There will be a 3 to 4 day period where it smells, and I mean, like, you don't want to be near it. You'd rather have chicken manure or something. The deer love it, so it's a nice wildlife attractant if you like to see them and or watch them while in a deer stand. So, you've got that as an added benefit. I would argue that, the diversity that we put out with a turnip radish, and then we also run a plant called Facilia. I don't have good pictures of that. It's a nitrogen scavenger. It's a nice mix. It all winter kills. Killing something off in the spring with chemicals is an added pass. This year especially is going to be hard because we can't get the chemicals we need to kill it. So, again, I know there's a lot of rye acres in other parts of the world where they put rye in behind corn, no-till beans into it. It has a place. Northern Illinois, it can be a little bit of a shaky proposition. I would argue that we probably have put in as many or more cover crops than most people in the county and have watched that work and watched that fail. Not every operation has the amount of equipment needed to do it, and the amount of money that it takes to buy the equipment you need to do it is immense. You could argue that neighbors could co-op and buy a crimper together or something like that. Well, if Alan needs it at the same time I do, who gets the crimper? So whose yield gets hurt if we can't get across it? You know, that doesn't always work for everybody. So this is, it's a screenshot, so it's not a great picture, but that's the Harvard FFA field, which is, I would argue, one of the hardest fields in the county to farm because it's junk. But we put turnips and radishes and all that good stuff up there. Actually, yeah, Linda took that picture. So we did that, and everybody thought it was great until, like I said, they rotted, and we caught a lot of grief from the neighbors to the point where a few of them tried to stop us from doing that again, which I'm going to do that again. So it really does. It helps. I mean, that farm, that's the corn crop that followed that was one of the best crops we've ever had off that farm, bar none. You know, was it the tillage radishes and all that? I'm not sure, but I didn't have to deal with washouts the next year, which was really nice. And that's Alan's slide, that's not mine. You know, there's not a lot of diversity in our area anymore. Actually, there happens to be a lot of diversity in the room as far as guys who don't just crop farm. You know, but we're the few who have livestock. You know, we do have manure that we have to apply. It has to go somewhere. The worst ground is usually the best ground that needs it. So, you know, if we can utilize some of these things, the cover crops, to help hold them in place, pull the nutrients to the top, and change those farms, that's great. I would argue the no fall fertilizer thing from MCCD, you could probably make the case where if you threw out a turnip radish mix behind corn, there's no reason that you couldn't put fall fertilizer down if it works the way they say it does and holds everything in place. So, you know, it works. Does anybody have any questions? Dan.
Hold on a second. Who's got one?
Dan does.
More comments than questions. You refer to things in your opinion that it was a good or a bad thing. It's your experience. You've been there. You did that. Please use that word going forward. Your experience. You saw it work or didn't work. Another comment. You brought up the fact of in northern Illinois how hard it is here to get these cover crops established because we're at the very end of the planting dates to do this when we're harvesting. One of the fastest ways we could do this, you said it, we could go out there and spread the seed on top as soon as that combine's done and go in with a vertical tillage tool and incorporate it in, get it growing right away. The district, take this into consideration, you've taken that option away from us. Vertical tillage leaves all that trash up on top of the ground, but it's creating that seed bed for these cover crops. You've got to help us if you want more of this done. Thank you.
I would agree with that fully. Taking the tillage away in the fall on the district ground would make it extremely hard to broadcast behind an early soybean harvest, and whether it's tillage radishes or rye, it doesn't matter. You can cover, I would venture to say, 2 to 3 times the acres in a day doing it the broadcast and vertical till route, and you can work anywhere from 1 to 3 inches deep, leaving the residue up on top while incorporating that seed and getting a really good establishment. I understand drilling is great, and I think somebody mentioned earlier, you know, not everybody has a no-till drill. Well, even if you have a no-till drill, most of them are 15 foot, and it takes a lot of time to cover acres. You know, our window is short. It truly is. Another thing that I didn't really mention in my bio or my history, I guess, and in my experience, Dan. So we farmed organically over 1,000 acres for, I think, 11 years. And, you know, we had a conventional growing at that time as well of regular crops. The amount of cover crops we did at that time was extensive. We never had a field that wasn't green in some way, whether it be a winter wheat crop growing, followed with like a red clover for nitrogen, and then, you know, right on in, we'd moldboard plow that in to get the green nitrogen, and the crop just kept coming and coming and coming. It was awesome, except for the part where you had a beautiful crop growing, and then the armyworms would come in on your wheat crop, or, you know, the Asian beetles would come in on your bean crop. I mean, you could literally lose 2/3 of your crop in days, and there was nothing you could do about it. And there's pest management that you can buy, and I mean, literally, if you guys want to know why we have those little ladybugs that smell, it's because people released them to kill aphids. I mean, that's pest management, is releasing another bug into an ecosystem. I mean, there's things you can spray that are organic, and they're supposed to take care of those things. And in a small environment on a garden, absolutely. Well, you've got hundreds of acres out there in the field, it's hard. It's extremely hard to do. So, you know, cover crops do a lot of nice things, but they also promote insects and grubs and wireworms, and you cannot deal with those on a large scale. The scale is extremely hard to deal with on an organics. Any more questions? Dan, again. Well, this guy's next.
I've got the mic up here, so we're
Right behind you.
I forgot earlier. I've never dealt with those tillage radishes before, but I was looking at the size of them. Have you ever had problems with those going down into a drainage system and the roots plugging it up?
So we tend to have a lot of drainage on our farms. It's the first thing we'll do. We'll correct drainage before we'll correct any nutrient deficiency. If you've got wet soils, you can't fix nutrients. So yeah, I've seen pictures in Iowa where it will get down into a tile and absolutely plug it up, and an absolute disaster. I've personally never seen it on our farm, and I hope I never do. But if your tile is at proper depth, you know, I mean 4 foot, you'd have to have a really long growing season for it to establish that, in my opinion. You know, I wonder, you know, were they in a 2.5 foot deep tile that probably is barely deep enough as it is? I'm not sure. I wasn't there, but I have seen pictures of it.
You mentioned the short growing period that we have here because we're so far north in comparison to the rest of the state. What's the latest that you can get a cover crop in on a usual basis and be successful?
So, I mean, we've taken beans off as early as September 5th in years and tried to establish them, and you just don't get that size and growth, which if you're going to spend the money, because it is a big financial commitment to put that cover crop out there, you know, it needs to work a high percentage time. If the ROI is not there, you can't just spin your wheels. So, you know, we flew some on with Doug this year and standing corn, and that was probably, was it August, Doug? Early August? So early August, and that worked pretty darn well. And I would also argue, because there's cover crops farther north than us, that the Lake Michigan being our shadow, hurts us as much as our proximity to the north. You know, we get a microclimate that comes off that thing, and it just gets too cold at night and too damp, and we don't grow in the fall. This year was special. Things worked out well. August worked well. September 5th, that stuff that we did, they didn't get big. And I didn't just try it once. It was year after year trying to get it right. So if that answers your question.
Thank you, Cody.
Alan?
Can we hear from Alan now?
I don't have near the experience Cody has with cover crops. I'm relatively new to it. We did start growing, we have a large dairy operation, and we needed extra heifer feed, so we started growing winter rye probably about 10 years ago. And then followed that up with corn, which wasn't the greatest, because sometimes getting the rye off in the spring and in May, you can have difficulties with the weather. If you get a wet May, it just carries on. So now I've started doing that again, planting the winter rye, and I've come back with like a sorghum sedan mix through the summer and just continue to grow forage. Found that works a lot better than following up with corn, seeing I'm not killing it early. And then when I got involved with spring on the program, I rented 200 acres of highly erodible ground, so I started the corn, bean, wheat rotation, so then after the wheat we're coming in with oats and radishes, but we're only 2 years into it, so I really don't have a whole lot of information to share. It did relatively well this last year, and that's about it. So if anybody has any questions. We've taken 2 cuttings off of it before we planted it. It will come back for, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, and you do get something off of it.
Do you no-till that rye into the...
And right after we chop the corn.
I asked if you could take a second cutting off the rye after you took off the first crop.
Yeah, we have.
And the second question was, did you no-till the rye into the bean stubble? No.
That went in after corn silage. Yeah,
When you
so
chopped your corn, you no-tilled it in.
it all depends how bad the fields are after we chop it. When you have a custom harvester come in with semis, sometimes you gotta fix the ground before you can plant into it. But if it's a dry year, yeah, you can no-till right behind them.
Can you make sure the mic is on?
You're a dairy farmer, right?
Yep.
Are you, just to kind of clarify, are you able to get any forage off these cover crops for your dairy herd?
For the rye, we are.
Yeah, and you're cutting it, right?
Yeah.
And then, okay.
Yeah, it's actually, I like it for the heifers. I mean, if you don't get at it right away, I mean, I've gotten up to between 5 and 10 round bales per acre off of it. But by doing that, it's kind of hard to get a good crop of corn after it. And that's why we started planting like sorghum sedan grass. And then we just keep harvesting it for forage through the summer.
Thank you.
And we've also actually, last winter, I guess after the wheat, or summer, I should say, after wheat, I did plant some oats in, and I also put sorghum sedan grass in late in July or early August, and I harvested that for feed too.
All right, thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Ben, would you mind coming up?
Let's see here. Do we have that PowerPoint?
I don't think they received one from you.
Okay. All right. All right, well, okay, so I'll just go ahead and talk about the CP43. So we had a unique situation on our farm. We had black walnut trees that my dad planted 40 years ago along our fence lines. And over the years, as they grew up, our corn yield decreased, soybean yields decreased, obviously. And so we're interested in possibly going into some CRP ground along those fence lines underneath walnut trees. CP43 was suggested, which was the prairie strips. And I've had some experience with native plantings that I've done since 2014 on our homestead. And I've had good success with that, so I went along and looked at the what CP43 required. CP43 requires, let's see, grasses will comprise 40 to 60% of the mix, and then forbs will include blooms in early, mid, and late growing season, and a minimum of 10 species. And so I looked at some mixes from Pheasants Forever and other places for CP43. And the thing that concerned me was just the juglone that came from the walnut trees, that toxin, making sure that the plants would tolerate that. And so I actually looked into making a specialized mix myself. And that's how I got in contact with Eleanor Schumacher. And she helped me walk through and find juglone tolerant plants. Something that I hadn't considered was my different soil types. I was just looking at doing one straight mix with kind of as few species as possible, because I'm not a botanist and I don't know all the all the species that are out there, just for ease of management. But I hadn't considered the different soil types, and I thought that was a worthwhile consideration to plant what's going to grow in the different soil types. We ended up with the two mixes, the dry mix and the wet mix. In both of those mixes, we ended up with 24 species in each mix, and 42 different species in all total. And I figured that trade-off, going from fewer species, from what I was looking at, to large or more species, it provides good ground cover, and I had good experience with planting a wide varieties of species in my small plots at home too. So we went along with those 42 different species. Now, when I went to go and seed those, they're 30-foot strips. I plant with a 12-row planter, so it was real easy. The following, we ended up planting in the spring in March and just frost seeding it by hand. And so we walked down the edge of those 12 rows, planted flags every 30 feet, and then we ended up mixing that seed with a filler, with a carrier, because trying to sow that small amount of seed just by itself, you can't get an even spread with that. And the variety of seeds and seed sizes was such that I didn't feel comfortable trying to use a spreader to walk or to drive down through the field and then have to deal with the stuff freezing in the hopper or anything like that. I figured for sure I could divide it by bags and then drop a bag in each section, and we ended up taking each one of those sections, the 30-foot squares, and just walking around the edges of it and spiraling inwards, and then the remainder of it we just broadcast by ourselves. And it was labor intensive getting all the seed sorted out into bags, but in the end, I think the amount of control that I had over it and being able to make sure that each section had the same amount of seed was worthwhile. And so this summer, I did that. I seeded it last March, and this summer I had to mow it, just like Eleanor was saying. And I mowed it about 3 times, keeping it down to about 8 inches in height. And we had a good amount of the native seeds coming up, and now it'll just be a matter of managing it, and we'll see how that goes. Any questions?
So in my experience, I've never done one of these pollinator plots, but the more varieties of seed you add into a mix, the more expensive it gets. Can you give us an idea of what that seed is costing you? 42 different varieties is a lot of seed.
Oh yeah, yep. It was pricey, and the cost share didn't even cover all of it. So, but that was on my end, and I thought that was worthwhile for what I'm trying to do. Let's see. Yeah, it's pricey. I'll get back to you. How about that?
Ben, how many acres did you end up hand seeding?
9.5. 9.5
Wow.
acres.
Yeah.
But again, breaking it down into those bags, you just drive a pickup truck through when it's frozen ground, drop it off. And, you know, it takes a while, but it was a few days.
So, Ben,
Yep.
you were talking about your pollinator plots, and maybe this is a question I kind of was also thinking you or Eleanor. My NRCS rep came out, and I was talking about strips. He was telling me about being aware of this parcel being too small and being a sink for the pollinators. They come and gather, and the crop fields get sprayed. Have you heard any, has either of, I mean, that's first I'd heard of it, but a too small parcel that attracts the pollinators, and then they get killed off when the field gets sprayed, in the adjacent field.
Definitely, there has to be some responsibility when managing with pesticides. If you're having to apply pesticides, I think that there is a buffer that is implied there, and yeah, you have to definitely coordinate with whoever your applicator is. That they're spraying on a day where, I mean, according to having a pesticide applicator license, you're not supposed to be spraying pesticides if the wind is above 8 miles an hour. So, you know, following that, you know, following care. But it is definitely something that has been under scrutiny by researchers for a long time. And I think that at this point, the science leans far enough over towards the enhancement of pollinator populations and diversity. And that's why this practice has been adopted by the USDA. But you know, I'm just gonna say really quickly, it's hard because they are marginal areas, they are narrow. Also, you know, look at what IDOT is doing, putting in all kinds of monarch habitat right on I-55. You know, how many monarchs get hit by trucks and cars? You know, it's rough. And they've been researching this, and they've decided that it's just safe enough. You know, it's worth doing, so.
As far as spray drift goes, I do mention to the sprayers, you know, make sure you keep, just like she said, keep a buffer, because I know that spray drift happens. It's, go ahead.
Under your walnut tree, well, your 24 seed mix or your 42 seed mix, underneath your walnut trees, some will come up the first year, and then as you maintain it, the different seeds will progress. But what did you get really coming up the first year underneath those walnuts?
Oh, goodness. Again, I'm not a botanist, and I don't know exactly what came up. But we saw flowers, definitely some of the seeds that we planted, some of the grasses. Sorry, I'm not a real good botanist on that. Blue stem, I saw blue stem, I know that. Yeah. So.
Walnuts can be pretty prolific. How are you going to manage the walnut regeneration in the strip? Underneath?
Yeah, cutting. And yeah, just managing that, just cutting it, mowing it if we have to.
Okay.
You know, the goal is to minimize mowing,
Right.
but they've been pretty good on how, you know, if you have to do something to manage it, that's what you do. So.
All right, we're running up against lunch. So if you have any additional questions for them, can you talk to them at lunchtime? And please give them a round of applause, please. Okay, so we will be breaking for lunch. We do encourage you to continue these conversations while we're at lunch. Sherry's going to give us a little idea of where we're going to go for lunch, and if you do have any dietary restrictions that you indicated on your registration forms, we do have those lunches set aside, so please let one of us know and we'll make sure we get your lunch for you.
So right across the cafeteria towards that bank of windows, we have several tables reserved for you to sit at and have lunch, and the bagged lunches are there. The dietary specialty lunches are in a brown box right in front of the table. Thank you.
And we'll meet back in here at 1 o'clock. And you can leave your stuff in here, right, Sherry? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, the slide wasn't advancing. I work among a team here at Illinois Farm Bureau in the Government Affairs and Commodities Division. On the environmental team, we have our Director of Environmental Policy, Lauren Lurkins, and then our Program Manager, Raylan Parmalee, and then myself. I am a recovering water quality scientist that now works in policy. Lauren is a ex-defense attorney, and Raylan Parmalee is a social scientist. So we have quite a diverse group here working for Illinois Farm Bureau. It's almost like the start of a joke if we all walked into a bar. But I do appreciate this opportunity to share what we're working on in two of the many areas you can see up on the screen. We work in a lot of environmental policy areas that touch, our farms here in Illinois, and two of those are water quality and climate change and ecosystem markets. And so I'll go over a little bit of our approach today. We do have organizational policy at Illinois Farm Bureau, which directs what we work on and the resources that we spend working on that. And some of those resources are obviously appropriated according to our priorities, which our Illinois Farm Bureau Board of Directors sets every year. And this year they set climate, sustainability, and waters of the United States as kind of our environmental priorities. So this aligns very nicely with what we'll be doing over the next year, or at least focusing on. So our state nutrient loss reduction strategy, I'm sure folks have mentioned this maybe in session 3 earlier today, but there are strategies in every state in the Mississippi River Basin. They differ greatly. The Hypoxic Task Force, directed by EPA, really guides and oversees a lot of the work throughout the Mississippi River Basin, which is led by our states. And then they also put out a report on the Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone size. And so what we're currently seeing from a federal standpoint from US EPA is we are seeing some funding come down to the states from the federal level from the infrastructure funding. And so we're expecting $60 million to go to 12 hypoxic task force states. It's going to be, in Illinois, it'll be roughly about $1 million a year for 5 years. And so that is going to provide resources to address some of the next issues I bring up on the next slide. And then I'll also mention later when we talk about climate and carbon markets, some of the USDA funding and how that's trickling down from the federal level. But in Illinois, we do have one of these strategies. It's the nutrient loss reduction strategy, and it did set an interim goal for 2025, which we are showing that we are not necessarily going to meet that goal as far as water quality goes. But one thing I want to point out is that the nutrient loss reduction strategy is focused on more than just the water quality. It is tracking the resources, the outreach, and the land and facilities which groups throughout the state are attributing resources to. And so we work very hard to track that progress and report that progress from an Illinois Farm Bureau perspective back to the nutrient loss reduction strategy. So we are seeing a great success as far as sustained investment goes toward implementing the nutrient loss reduction strategy at the state level here in Illinois. And just kind of an example of that is that in the nutrient loss reduction strategy, which the recent report that came out in 2021, it was over a 200-page document, and 80 of those pages, right around 80 of those pages, were agricultural sector efforts toward implementing the nutrient loss reduction strategy across all 4 of those areas that I mentioned earlier. And one thing also I want to mention is I'm a scientist, so I always want to go into dig into the data a little bit, and it's not all bad news. We're seeing at the last monitoring location on the Mississippi River, that nitrate's actually decreasing. We don't know why there's a discrepancy there between Illinois' data and the USGS data on the mainstream of the Mississippi, but that's an area which we need more science on. And so Illinois Farm Bureau has spent a significant amount of resources toward implementing the nutrient loss reduction strategy since 2015. We've appropriated around $2.4 million. And some of that has gone towards, getting at more science and putting more science on the ground to help understand nutrient loss. And then also what is happening to those nutrients after they leave farm fields or point sources. And one thing I want to mention too to the group is that we do have in Illinois something that's somewhat unique, is we do have a tax levied on tons of fertilizer, which goes into the Illinois Nutrient Research and Education Council, which funds a lot of researchers such as the next speaker you'll hear from. And to date, they've spent around $31 million of farmer funding toward researching and demonstrating nutrient loss reduction strategy on our landscapes. And so I guess the last thing I'll wrap up with is we continue to support the nutrient loss reduction strategy through multiple different venues. But I would say that we definitely need more data, and Illinois Environmental Protection Agency is working very hard to improve their data collection efforts. And we also need more scientific research into lag times and some of the reasons why we aren't seeing improvements in our downstream waters after we improve things on the landscape. And so one of the efforts that Illinois Farm Bureau has going on is we call it our Nutrient Stewardship Grant Program. To date, it's spent almost $1 million, which goes down to our grants, or it goes to grants to our county farm bureaus, in which they put on projects aimed at implementing the nutrient loss reduction strategy. These can be anything between cover crop plots and education, to research into water quality, to simple things such as a handout at an event. So it's a wide variety of effort types that go into implementing the nutrient loss reduction strategy under this grant program. One thing I'm excited about is this doesn't have to do with nutrient stewardship, but we did add a pollinator conservation grant program this next year. And so this year we'll have 21 nutrient stewardship projects, and then we'll have 9 pollinator projects, which are going on the ground in collaboration with our counties and many partners. And one example that's kind of close to home for y'all is in 2020, McHenry County Farm Bureau applied for a nutrient stewardship grant project in collaboration with McHenry County Conservation District to install Woodchip Bioreactor on the Conservation District's property. And so they installed that in 2021 and continue to monitor that for water quality to date, and applied for another small grant to continue that water quality monitoring as well. And one thing I'll mention probably at the end of this as well is all of this information is available. We have videos. We went virtually in 2020 and 2021 also. So we have videos of all our field days, and that continues to be a great resource for folks to go see what's happening throughout Illinois. Another partnership that we have is we call it our Edge of Field Partnership. It's focused to implement the nutrient loss reduction strategy, just like the previous grant program. But this is a partnership between Illinois Land Improvement Contractors Association, U of I, Southern Illinois University, NRCS, and Illinois Farm Bureau, in which we plan to install a bioreactor every year for 5 years and a saturated buffer every year for 5 years for demonstration, and then also research as well. We're collecting water samples on those as well. And the last thing I'll mention as far as the nutrient loss reduction strategy implementation is we do see the benefits and support a lot of watershed planning and partnerships throughout the state. A lot of these are directed from the NLRS priority watersheds. And so we currently have projects that are happening in the Embarrass River, Mississippi North Central, Lake Bloomington, Vermilion River, Lake Decatur, and Lake Springfield. In the McHenry County area, you can kind of see that shaded area. Those are priorities for point source nitrogen and phosphorus, but we do continue to work throughout the remainder of the state on different projects aimed at nutrient loss reduction strategy, implementing that. So And then I guess the second topic I want to talk about, I feel like I need to tell everybody to fasten their seatbelts before we get into this because it changes so rapidly. But the carbon markets, we'll talk about that briefly after I go over what we're seeing at the federal level as far as climate change implementation. And so Illinois Farm Bureau does have policy on this, which allows us to advocate for this and advocate for our members in this issue. And we actually took this policy to American Farm Bureau Federation to get this policy accepted at the federal level as well. So now our American Farm Bureau has climate change policy as well, but I don't expect you all to read this, but I mean, our policy book is available online. Many of our farmers that are members already have our policy book, but it does focus on improving carbon markets for some of the things that I'll mention a little bit later. But I just wanted to mention that we do have policy on climate change and carbon markets, and that's what allows us to really work in this area and advocate for farmers. Overall thoughts on what we're seeing at the federal level and then also through carbon markets is there's a lot of discussion happening in this area. I think everybody pretty much knows that. So far, it's been pretty positive toward agriculture as being a solution for mitigating climate change through carbon sequestration and other methods. And this estimate that I have on here of greater than 200 billion is probably pretty low. I saw an estimate globally for ecosystem markets that estimates the market potential to be around $36 trillion globally. And so that's kind of an old estimate, but it's just looking at America and soil carbon alone, the market value could be over 200 billion. So we're seeing a lot of activity in this area. A lot of this is private companies, which are driven by consumers wanting, more climate-friendly products, and to see, offsets for the production of those products. So at the federal level, the Biden administration came in and I'm sure everybody's seen the executive orders, but they basically create a whole government approach in which every branch, every aspect of our federal government is looking at climate change and how to mitigate climate change. And then we're also seeing global commitments, to reduce emissions 50% by 2030 from the 2005 base levels. The current focus of congressional activity really is what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of alliances, and we're seeing a lot of groups that are wanting to get involved. Congress has had hearings focused on ag and climate. We saw the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which passed the Senate, and then we're seeing that there was the potential to see a Build Back Better that was only focused on climate, but currently we don't expect there to be, and of course this could change tomorrow, but we aren't really seeing any appetite for Congress to take up anything until after the election. So again, I could be proven wrong tomorrow on that, but that's kind of what we're hearing. And then also we're started discussions on the 2023 Farm Bill, and we expect climate priorities to be pretty heavy throughout the 2023 Farm Bill. We haven't seen anything really significant out of US EPA as far as what their approach is going to be on climate. And so we don't know as far as methane emissions and nitrous oxide emissions and things like that. It's still a big question mark. And then on the current USDA programs, we're kind of seeing the USDA address climate change by really just putting more funding into their already existing programs. And so we see EQIP, conservation, innovation grants, and the Regional Conservation Partnership program getting more and more money. We did see the release of the $1 billion in carbon pilots using the CCC, and so they have a request out for proposals for that. We're seeing that as really a mix of research and also implementation. And so it'll be interesting to see what projects get funded there, but the funding does go all the way up to $99 million for a project. So they're looking at very, very large projects which are aimed at getting carbon sequestration on the ground, and then also being able to measure that. And then we also saw, $59 million in RMA cover crop benefits, and then the pandemic cover crop assistance there as well. So on the private side, switching over to private carbon markets, these are voluntary incentive-based markets. They allow farmers to make money on selling carbon credits and to opt in to share their data. And so what we're seeing that there have been a lot of differentiations across the different companies that are in this area, trying to stand out and trying to become, I guess, a more farmer-friendly program. And so some of that is based on outcomes, or what I call pay for performance, in which you're going to get paid for the actual carbon you sequester, which puts a lot of risk on the farmer. Or the other option there is we're seeing a lot of programs that just pay like a base rate of $10 an acre to do cover crops or no-till. And so then the company acquires that risk, but then the company can also turn around and make money off those credits. So we're seeing two different models there. Again, we're seeing a lot of different modeling and things happening to certify and quantify those outcomes. There's a lot of different approaches out there. Most of them are focused on modeling and not necessarily a measurement such as a soil sample, which I know Andrew will probably go into later. But our farmers and members of Illinois Farm Bureau have reached out to us with a lot of different barriers to these carbon markets. And so I'll talk about our approach here in a little bit, but I mean, these are some of the barriers that we've heard expressed, the verification as far as how do you quantify how much carbon you sequester with cover crops or no-till additionality. So the farmers that are already doing no-till and cover crops, how are they going to get paid for that? Permanence, as far as, if you do sequester carbon in your soil, how long is it going to stay there? And then also just other things that have to do with the contract, as far as who controls data, the length of the contracts, unclear when you're going to get paid and how, when that's going to happen. And then also a lot of different contract terms, which people are taking to their legal representation and really seeing a lot of non-beneficial things within those contracts. So, to date, I have, Illinois Farm Bureau, we really just want to represent our members and kind of ensure that these markets are as beneficial as possible to farmers. And we also want to protect those farmers who do want to participate in this. And really the way that we're suggesting we protect them right now is currently to have their legal staff essentially look over these contracts and have an attorney involved. And then we are constantly listening and taking feedback from our members and educating ourselves alongside our scientists, economists, other companies, and American Farm Bureau. And then we do advocate to our members in Congress and provide a lot of USDA comments on this today. But it is an evolving market that they're trying to figure out how it works while also implementing. So things change very quickly. But we do spend quite a bit of time on science support, not only just for the nutrient loss reduction strategy, but also with our scientists here in our state to try to figure out what some realistic numbers are for carbon sequestration. And I don't want to go into too much of this because I think Andrew might hit on it. But also, what is the true value of that carbon? And again, in a beginning market, it's really hard to pin down what that value is. But also then, the verification piece of that science is still working on. And so we do have some collaborations here in the state. I will mention Dr. Trent Ford. He's our state climatologist. If you have an opportunity to listen to Dr. Ford talk about adaptation and mitigation of climate, and specifically what kind of impacts that is going to have in Illinois, I highly recommend it. We have a couple projects that we're working on with him to try to scale down, you know, these impacts and what it means for actually Illinois farmers, instead of just looking at everything on a global scale. You know, what changes in precipitation and drought are we going to see here in the state? And so we work with him on that. We also work with Kai Guan. He's an expert in satellite modeling and machine learning, and then also Andrew Margonaut, which you'll hear from here in a few minutes. So I guess my recommendation, I'll get to here in a second for farmers, but the real thing that we don't know here is the role that the federal government's going to play in this that will impact greatly how successful these markets are, and put simply, how successful these markets will be is either the federal government will get involved or they won't get involved, and we don't know that now. The entire, you know, I guess you'd call it carbon credit system is still in the process of being developed. I think a lot of people are just focused on how to generate these credits on the farm level, but there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that has to go in behind the scenes as far as how do you regulate these transactions, and you know, there's a lot of infrastructure that still needs to be built to make these a viable thing. But if they do become a thing, then we'll only see this grow, and then that's actually advantageous to our farmers because you can be choosy and consult your attorney, and then think about your operation and plan for the future as far as how much you want to get involved in this. And then also you always have to think about your risk as far as, is this going to allow your operation to operate normally, or is this going to be, I guess for lack of a better term, a burden on you in the future if weather changes and you have a bad year, and how much flexibility there is in some of these contracts. So I guess that wraps everything up. I guess if it's all right with the group, we can take questions after Andrew's presentation, because I have a feeling he might answer some of those scientific questions that folks might have. But feel free to reach out to me, contact me. Always willing to talk to folks about what I just talked about and all the other things we have going on. So.
Okay, so thank you, Austin, for that. I think Austin set me up pretty well here for what I'm about to talk about. So part of the things that Austin has just talked about are these high-level discussions of carbon markets. What I want to do with the next about 25 minutes is to give more details on the science of what is carbon in soils like. What does it take to sequester more carbon, and what are some of the challenges or considerations that you as a farmer, landowner, researcher, someone in ag may want to keep in mind when wading into this pool? As you probably gathered from Austin's talk, this is rapidly evolving. About a year ago, there were whispers of carbon markets. It's been around since the 1990s, but in the last maybe 6 months, it has rapidly, exponentially increased in terms of money and seriousness. So that's my goal, is to give you some better handle on the science of it. All right, so as an introduction, my name is Andrew Margonaut. I'm an assistant professor at tenure track at U of I in Urbana-Champaign. What my labs group, all 30 of us, what we try to do is and what we strive to do is to support the goals of Illinois agriculture. So we work internationally, that's about 10% of our research portfolio, but about 85% is solidly in the realm of Illinois production systems. So these topics range from nutrients, how can farmers use nutrients profitably? And that ties into supporting, from an agricultural perspective, ensuring that we've got fair and accurate action on the nutrient loss reduction strategy. I pause there because I'm not sure how to phrase this. We want to get it right in terms of numbers like phosphorus losses that are being attributed to the non-point sources of agriculture. Anyhow, so those are two themes, nutrients, both for crop production and for nutrient loss goals, and also organic matter. And this is the second one of organic matter here in the bullet points that I'm going to be really honing in on today. How we do this is through on-farm research. To me, this is highly valuable as the way to understand the real-world complexity of things. You might be thinking, well, what's the other option? Well, the other option could be a bunch of professors at the U of I campus have very small plots. We're talking 10 by 20 feet, and they do experiments that are highly controlled on these small plots. That is important, but it's a starting point, not an end point. For me, for our group, the end point and the real means to an end would be on-farm research. We also enjoy great partnerships, including those with the Illinois Farm Bureau and county farm bureaus as well. So I've had the pleasure of working with Austin and with Lauren Lurkins in these different projects. Okay, so I want to set the stage for the discussion here on carbon. Again, I want you to come out of this knowing more of the science and the nuances of carbon sequestration. To set the stage, I think we have to go back 10,000 years ago, maybe 12,000 years ago, to talk about the glaciers that have shaped our landscapes. And where you're sitting right now in McHenry County is arguably the ground zero of glaciation. So I've not yet been to McHenry County. You'll forgive me for that, I hope, because I'm only 4 years into the state. But I do have maps that tell me what it's like. So when I say glaciation, I mean sheets of ice. It's hard to imagine, but they were up to 2 or even 3 miles thick of ice in the thickest points. So where I grew up around Boston, really Rhode Island, a little tiny thing here that is like 2 of your counties up north. So out in Boston, South New England, we had up to 2 miles of ice. And in Illinois, it was at least a mile thick. Now there were different episodes of glaciers, and these are color-coded on the left-hand legend. The Wisconsinian was the most recent one that was preceded by the Illinoisan. So these go back, as you go from top to bottom, these go back chronologically in time. And what you can make out is that the central north of Illinois was most recently glaciated by the Wisconsinian Glacier. Before that, there was another glaciation event called the Illinoisan that made it all the way down to just about Carbondale, but it didn't hit the very southern tip of Illinois. So we have a very strong difference in two things as a result of the number and the recency of these glaciations. The first one is the soil types. So broadly speaking, where the Wisconsinian Glacier hit, we find the quote flat and black. So things like Drummer, Flanagan, these black prairie soils. Where you only had the Illinoisan, you get more of these gray, whitish, not white, but grayish soils, lower organic matter, often called timber soils, colloquially speaking. And then the very southern tip here is really, they're more like Kentucky and Tennessee soil types. These are what we call ultisalts. So this is important because the glaciated region of the northern U.S. continent, or of the North American continent, has very distinct soils, and we can better understand what they're like and how they will respond to carbon sequestration efforts based upon this history. So a different way to look at this map with the larger, if we telescope out, look at the North American continent, over the last 40,000 years or so, we have different ice sheets. So the Canadians 12K years ago were just buried under 2 miles of ice. And you can make out our state right here. We see the same lobe in the dark gray where my cursor is. That's where north central, including McHenry County, is located, obviously. So a few things about glaciers. Think of these as being moving across our landscapes at very slow paces. So if you were to speed up the frames per second at a geological time scale, so we're talking 1 second is 100 years, you would see these glaciers in cold periods of the planet climate, they would expand, and in warmer periods, they would contract, they would be melting. So this is a lot like kneading dough. If you're making a pizza or you're making a pie, you knead out the dough. And with the rolling pin, that's how you might want to think of the glaciers. They're rolling pin. This explains why a lot of our landscapes in the Midwest are relatively flat compared to, say, Colorado. They didn't get the glaciers. They weren't rolled flat. Now, there's significant features that these glaciers have imprinted. And from McHenry County up there, you can see it's pretty complicated in terms of the striations. It's really mixed up, right? Compare that to, say, Warren Henderson County region up here. It's pretty much the same. There's no moraines. There's a lot of what we call moraines then in McHenry County. So what's a moraine? A moraine is basically, if you imagine a bulldozer pushing a pile of dirt or a snowplow pushing a pile of snow, the pile that's left at the end of the movement, the dump pile, that's a moraine. So the moraine in the top figure here would look like part of the glacier. But once the glacier melts, we get the second image on the bottom left. And we have this small rise. Now these rises are quite nuanced. So the Bloomington moraine, where Austin is pretty notable. You've got some here in Champaign County further to the southeast, and they're very subtle. We're talking a rise and fall of maybe 50 to 100 feet. But those are what the moraines look like in our state. Now, what you can make out then is that up in McHenry County, there's a fair amount of moraines that are interspersed with non-moraine areas. So in your county, you actually have a fairly high heterogeneity of landscape. Basically, it can be very hilly and very flat in short distances of space. Okay, so if we were to visualize this, on the left, we've got a relief map, two-dimensional of McHenry County. And then on the right-hand side, we have a three-dimensional depiction of the same area, but now honed in on McHenry County. So you can make out that there's a fair amount of up and downs. Now, these are relief maps that are exaggerating the landscape rise and fall to bring out the differences. But in short, as you probably all know, much of your county is basically consisting of a lot of moraines that are interacting with each other. And as a matter of fact, in doing some homework for this, I found that McHenry County is recognized as one of the places in the world and in the Midwest to study glacial moraines. So that's, I think, a pretty cool thing. All right, so let's talk now about what this means for soils. So because there's more moraines left by the glaciers, these dump push piles left behind, there's more variegation of landscapes, and soil types are actually quite diverse. This is important for carbon sequestration because different soil types have different capacities to hold onto more carbon. Now here is just an example of 3 surveys of soils in McHenry County. First was in 1921, then 40 years later in 61, and then more recently was updated by the federal government, not by the state, for the 2009 time period. They overall had the same amount of information, and they go through pretty much at the 40-acre scale, or smaller, what are the major soil types in your county? These, by the way, if you go to USDA NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, they have all these PDFs for free, and you can consult with them. Okay, so in 1921, one of the main focuses of the soil survey in Illinois, and McHenry County was no exception, was taking inventory, quite literally, of the amount of nutrients in topsoils. So they were trying to understand in the surface soils down to about 20 inches, about how much pounds of P, nitrogen, K for potassium, sulfur down the list are inherently there. So we have to remember that nutrients, we do add them as fertilizers to replenish what we remove with crop harvest. The basic principle of being sustainable, we need fertilizers, but there's inherently native fertility in any soils, anywhere. And in our state, we're blessed with really high levels of those because of these glaciers. So this is just to give you a feel for what soil scientists were doing 100 years ago, 101 years ago exactly, actually, when this was published, was understanding the amount of nutrients. And note that they also talk about organic carbon. So even 100 years ago, they were talking about organic carbon, but they weren't really thinking about this from the perspective of carbon sequestration. However, this is a good indication of there's a lot of pounds per acre of carbon in a typical quote unquote soil survey in McHenry County. So we're talking in pounds here, so to get to tons, that's the typical units or the currency of carbon markets. We think about tons per acre. That's roughly about 25 tons per acre in the depth of 0 to 6 or 0 to 20 inches. So for perspective, if you're in, say, tropical regions like in Kenya, where I've worked quite a bit, very bad soils, it's too warm to store carbon, you might be looking at more like 10. So McHenry County is looking pretty good. Now, the soil types obviously are quite complex. If I were to show you a map of Champaign County, it's a lot more simple than McHenry County because we're flat. We're relatively simple because of the glaciation. But as I mentioned, there's so many interlaced networks of these dumps left by the glaciers, the moraines. There's a lot of complexity at the county scale of soil types. So this is an overview shown by color code of major soil types. I'm sure a lot of you who farm or own land might recognize these, or those of you who even are building homes. We think of the best soils as, say, the Drummer or the Flanagan, but there's other kinds like the Elliott-Varna series shown here in green, which are also quite fertile as well. Now, if we compare the soil map on the left with the map of the moraines on the right, broadly speaking, if you kind of blur out your eyes, they kind of match. We see more patterns, these kind of fingerings of these lobes of the moraines. They sort of dictate the soil types. And this comes down to what we call parent material. So parent material, like parents, you bear a child, the child is born from its parents. Soils are born from different kinds of rocks or different kinds of parent materials. And these are typically in McHenry County, the moraines, or when the glaciers melted, they left sometimes lots of sand. So you have strong contrasts, again, by virtue of your unique moraine-enriched landscape in the county. All right, so that's to understand the geology and the soil types of McHenry. I think it's good now to switch gears and talk about, well, let's discuss carbon. I want to give you now an overview in more detail what Austin has touched on of carbon markets, and specifically talking about the science of sequestering carbon in your soils. So carbon markets, these are just examples of more recent chatter. They're arguably kind of outdated now. This is from last March, last July, but as we talked about in the last 6 months, this has exploded. So carbon markets and carbon sequestration, I don't need to use those loosely. They're different. Sequestration is really the act of having carbon added in soil. And the carbon markets seek to capitalize literally on that sequestration. The whole idea here is that if people who manage land, they could be farmers, landowners, but also say rangelands, they could be the U.S. Forestry Department. Managers of land have an opportunity to manage in such a way that they can quantify, look, I have increased the amount of carbon in my soil. That is directly due to CO2 being taken up by plants. Plants act as a conduit, as a straw for CO2 from the atmosphere to get funneled into the soil. This is what people are proposing. There's a lot of complexities here, but then the idea is that if you can quantify how much carbon you took out of the atmosphere and had in your soil through things like, say, cover crops or agroforestry, then we can put a tangible number, and now we can sell that number as a credit. And so this might be a way for, say, big emitters like coal-fired plants to say, we're going to buy credits from McHenry County farmers, and they're going to get paid per ton of carbon per acre. So this is the broad overview. I'm going to talk about the carbon aspect. Obviously, we could probably spend 4 hours on this easily, just on the science, to say nothing of the different realities of the market. So let's talk about SOC. SOC is the acronym for Soil Organic Carbon. Why am I saying organic? Well, there is also inorganic carbon like carbonates. This is what limestone is, calcium carbonate. We don't typically think of that when we discuss soil carbon credits. And SOC then is the acronym for Soil Organic Carbon. I want to talk through 6 topics. So the first 2 that are related are the dynamic equilibrium. I'll break down what the heck that means, and saturation of carbon. Then we'll talk about erosion. I think we overlooked erosion and the importance of our bread and butter practices like soil conservation, especially in a more hilly region like up north. The climate factors that ultimately dictate the maximums of carbon sequestration. Nitrogen. We know that it can be good to fertilize for carbon sequestration. We hear sometimes conflicting reports of fertilizing with nitrogen is a bad thing. It's not. It depends on how much you're putting on when it comes to carbon. And finally, we'll talk about, it should just be number 6, ways to achieve SOC increases. We won't be talking about spatial variability given the time constraints. So rapid fire, let's go through these. So the first concept that I want you to take in and to try to mull over is this thing that we call dynamic equilibrium. So this is important because when it comes to, say, grain, we're not really trading a discrete amount of grain. We're not trading a bushel of corn from that field, but rather it's the unit of bushel. So these are, fluid measurements. It's not fungible. In the same way, then, carbon is also a dynamic equilibrium. So when we talk about carbon in soils, the carbon that you had in your field 2 years ago isn't the same actual atoms of carbon. Now, the amount of carbon is the same, but it's been swapped out. So the common example here would be the cells in your body. So when you were 10 years ago, your cells have changed, right? Like your skin cells, they flake, they die, and you grow new skin cells. So it's still you, but the individuals that make you in terms of the cell level are different. This is the same for carbon. And the reason is that carbon is this continuous flow of carbon coming in and carbon coming out. So carbon coming in would be things like corn residues, the stalks, that's a carbon input. And then the outputs would be CO2. When microbes are active, they will respire, they're eating carbon and they're respiring it like we are CO2. A good analogy here would be that of a dam, the reservoir of a dam, more exactly. So we know that if we increase the flow of river into a reservoir, that we're going to have a larger amount of water stockpiled in the reservoir. If we open up the dam gates, we have more output. If the output exceeds the input, we have shrinkage of the reservoir. So this could be in a drought, less input through the rivers, more drawing by homes and by irrigation, so there's less water. This is the same thing for carbon. So when you think about carbon, think about what are practices that might move the needle on the inputs and on the outputs. We can increase carbon sequestration then through two ways. We can increase the inputs of carbon, things like cover crops, and we can decrease the outputs, things like CO2 respiration from tillage. And this figure on the right-hand side is maybe a little bit too complex, but I think it well captures if you till, you're going to have a little dip in carbon storage on the top right here, because you're going to see more respiration. So respiration is antagonistic to carbon storage. Again, it's respiring, the microbes are respiring the carbon that is otherwise soil carbon. That's the first point, is that this is a dynamic equilibrium. Think of the reservoir in the dam. Second is carbon saturation. Basic concept here is that soils cannot indefinitely keep on sequestering more carbon year after year. There are going to be hard limits. There's a ceiling on how much can be held. Just like a reservoir, it just can't keep on infinitely expanding. It's going to flow over the boundaries. Now, what determines the ceiling, how much saturation potential there is of soils for carbon, will depend on a myriad of factors. Some of these we cannot touch or change. These are soil texture, which is how much clay you have, sand, and silt, and climate. We can't really change that. But we can change how we manage. And so the figure right here on the bottom left is an example of how, under different kinds of practices of conventional tillage with the dotted lines, we have a lower carbon saturation in this horizontal dashed line compared to no tillage, which is the larger dashed line up here. And if we compare this to non-ag systems, we typically find more carbon saturation. But obviously, we want to use these really productive soils for agriculture. They've got immense potential. So the point here is that if your goal is to maximize carbon sequestration, you might want to retire farmland into, say, native prairie. If carbon was your only goal, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but just for perspective. So I think of carbon, by the way, as a ancillary, as a secondary benefit for producers and landowners that is secondary to the objective of agriculture, which is providing food and fuel and fiber. Anyhow, so the point here is that we want to think about the saturation function. If you think about carbon credits, if you hear anything from private sector or even in an agreement that you're signing and it talks about indefinite carbon payments because of indefinite carbon sequestration, that's not going to happen. There is going to be a maximum limit imposed on you by Mother Nature. Now, how much carbon can we sequester is an open question. It's a question that we're working on in my group with Farm Bureau and other partners. Globally speaking, we know that there are some pretty big deficits. So deficit meaning what we used to have under Prairie, what we have lost in 150 years of agriculture in Illinois is what we could potentially regain. Again, we have to balance what ag is for with the carbon benefits. So this map shows you as you go redder, there's a deeper deficit. Globally, places that have been farmed for longer, like Europe or China, have more deficits, but also the Midwest. Not as long as, say, Europe or China, where they've been farming rice for over almost 10,000 years, right? But we have very intensified agriculture. So it's not so much the duration as the intensity that leads to more deficits. This is, however, historically speaking. We now have new technologies, and these technologies let us be better stewards of the land. Things like reduced tillage, strip tillage, cover cropping technologies. These allow us to avoid this false dichotomy of having crop yields that are profitable with sequestering or maintaining carbon. We can have both, but it's not going to be the same as if it were original prairie. So this map on the right just shows you the real color. This is actual color values. If you were to use color chips, like using color for the homes of your home, and you can clearly see the imprint of the glaciation as I was talking about. This north central lobe that got the most recent glaciation has darker soil from the darkening of organic matter. All right. So let's talk about erosion as the third point. I want to bring this up because we talk so much about things like covered crops or reduced tillage. These have their very important roles in increasing carbon concentrations in soils, but we must not forget that if we lose soil by erosion, all of our efforts to increase soil carbon, also by the way, soil health, fertility, are literally being lost. And here's a good example from Iowa showing soils that were sampled in 1959 and the same exact location, the same yard scale, square meter, was resampled in 2007. And they found that you have eroded in general in Iowa the soils from the slow parts, but the soil has gone downhill. And so we see thicker topsoil as shown right here by the foot slope. So this is a good example of how erosion is, number one, not a net loss of carbon. It's simply a transfer, but we might lose locally, like on a knoll of a field. So keep in mind, erosion is, I think, overlooked in these discussions of carbon credits. You might want to think if you're on the receiving end, if you're at the bottom of a hill and the uphill gets tilled, you might be in a good position to cash in on carbon credits because it's going to be deposited on the foot slope. Conversely, if you're on a slope, you might have a harder time getting carbon credits to the extent that there's an erosion problem. Fourth is climate. So climate imposes hard limits on how much carbon can be sequestered. Basically, as you get hot and dry, like California, where I've worked, you just can't increase that much carbon. So in the Central Valley of California, on a good day, you've got about 1.5% organic matter. As you all probably know, without even trying, most soils in central north Illinois are going to be 2 to 4% organic matter. And if we do things like cover crops or no-till, they can easily hit 6 to 8%. So this is a function of climate as well as clay content. So broadly speaking, wetter and colder enables more carbon to be sequestered. The fifth point, the penultimate point that I'll make here, is nitrogen. So we need to think that organic carbon is only one component of organic matter. So organic matter is the same as what you and I are made out of, our flesh. We have a certain what's called stoichiometry. This is just the ratio of the elements. So carbon and nitrogen are roughly a 10 to 1, or if we include phosphorus, they're 100 to 10 to 1. So there's a ratio of the elements of carbon, nitrogen to phosphorus in organic matter. And roughly speaking, organic matter is about half carbon. So whether it's you or me, if we were to measure carbon of our bodies, we're half carbon, same for soil organic matter. This is important because it means that if we're trying to increase carbon stocks, we're not just adding carbon, we have to add nitrogen. So this is like chips and salsa, right? You never get the right amount of chips in a handful as you have in the bowl of salsa or chili or whatever. You always have to go back and get more of the other if you're a glutton like me. So too for carbon. And what this means is that if we're trying to sequester carbon, we have to add enough nitrogen to enable that ratio of 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. And globally speaking, there's not enough nitrogen, Haber-Bosch, being made as fertilizer to enable global carbon sequestration. In Illinois, we're lucky. We have access to relatively affordable nitrogen. I know it's hard to hear that in a year like this one for fertilizer prices, but we're talking like, compare this to say Sub-Saharan Africa or South America, you can't even buy these inputs. This is important too because you'll often hear that nitrogen will lead to carbon being lost. That is not true. That is false. It comes down to there is a Goldilocks of just right amount of nitrogen. And basically, if you're at the agronomic optimum nitrogen rate, the AONR, you actually need that amount of nitrogen fertilizer to increase or maintain organic carbon. If you have too little nitrogen, the microbes will burn up organic matter to get at the nitrogen. If you add too much fertilizer in, you will have microbes burn up the organic matter to get at the carbon. The microbes are doing the chips and salsa game. Your job then is to add enough nitrogen to support crop yields, but not trigger the microbes to burn up the organic matter. Long story short, if you hear any simplistic statements like adding nitrogen fertilizer is always bad for carbon, your red flag should go up. Okay, I'll end then on this slide, which is more tangibly, especially for the north of Illinois, how do we increase organic carbon, SOC stocks as part of carbon sequestration? There's really two likely good practices. These are likely not news to you either. One is cover crops. Cereal rye can deal with the cold winters. If you're down in South Illinois, then things like hairy vetch can probably do better. But cover crops, they're pretty simple. They also mitigate erosion, they decrease nitrate leaching. I'm sure you've heard about all the benefits. The other would be reduced or no tillage. So the third potential one could be manure. Manure has a lot of carbon in it. It's organic matter based. So if there's access to manure, if it's applied on a P basis to avoid over applying on an N basis, then that's a pretty good deal. So how these figure into our analogy of the reservoir is that carbon inputs through cover crops or manure are increasing what's going into the reservoir, the streams that feed the reservoir. And then the carbon outputs are being decreased through things like reduced or no tillage, less triggering stimulation of microbial respiration with less tillage. So this is probably not new to you, but I hope that this integrates the why you hear cover crops and reduced tillage as carbon sequestration practices. Okay, that's all that I have for today. I want to thank you for your time, and I think Austin and I have got a few minutes for questions.
So, Professor, thank you very much for your presentation. But I have a question about your statement on nitrogen. Why are you not putting into the equation the fact that 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen? And that usually through biology, that we receive nodulization through photosynthesis that then goes back into the roots of the soil. I mean, we would, I assume if everybody stopped farming today and we had a nuclear explosion, which we'd need to look at Chernobyl, and they've got their organic carbon is back up to 6% because of 20 years ago. So are you including that in your research or not?
Great question, thank you for that. So the example of Chernobyl, I'll start there. I think that's going to be an increase in carbon with abandonment of fields under ag because of revegetation, right? The photos of Chernobyl that we've seen, there's forests and meadows that are reclaiming those fields. And I don't think that's going to be due to biological end fixation. That's going to be largely the effect of what I was mentioning, that if you want to maximize carbon, the best way is to not farm land. It's to put it back into meadows and forests and prairies. So I think that would explain the increase. You raise a good point about biological end fixation. This is largely through the root nodules of leguminous plants. So when it comes to a crop like corn, that's not going to factor in, unfortunately, as a source of nitrogen, insofar as it matters for carbon sequestration. So you're correct that the atmosphere is 70% nitrogen, N2 gas, and we can tap into a small sliver of that through biological end fixation. Otherwise, we use anthropogenic human end fixation, which is Haber-Bosch nitrogen. I think the bigger thing to think about, and these aren't really my equations, these are just general knowledge that I'm trying to pass on, is when it comes to growing a crop that needs nitrogen, microbes always outcompete the crop. Microbes always take their share of nitrogen before the crop does. They're quicker and faster and just in the spot where nitrogen is being mineralized from organic matter. So when we're fertilizing, say, a corn crop with nitrogen, the microbes get the first dib. And that's why if you under or over fertilize, you can stimulate the microbes to eat up the organic matter, either for the seed or for the end. Now, if we were to go back to a world without Haber-Bosch nitrogen, we might see a pretty big carbon deficit. So that's because leguminous plants can't meet all of the nitrogen needs for high-yielding grain crops that are not legume crops. So long story short, I guess, what I'm trying to say is that you're right about the example of Chernobyl, but it's also, I think, illustrative of to increase carbon, you simply don't want to farm the land. If we're going to farm it, we need to supplement BNF with N fertilizers.
We have a follow-up.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. And I don't want to be that guy, but I will. It's a good academic discussion. But I think it's an important discussion nonetheless to have. But I appreciate the fact that you bring up the fact that the nodulization of soybeans, but there's so many other crops that are available in nitrogen that will give us nitrogen besides soybeans. I mean, we look at hairy vetches and several other plants out there that will enable to break down the carbon-nitrogen ratio. That's the issue that we have, is when farmers are complaining that they have too much carbon stored above ground because they have too big of a corn crop, is that they have too much carbon above ground and they don't have the mineralization that's occurring because their biology isn't working for them. And they're not allowing the photosynthesis to happen to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it back into the roots is where we're coming from. And just to, if you need some research, or I mean, I've taken my soil, in 10 years we've gone from less than 1% organic matter to 3.5% organic matter. So farmers are doing this quite a bit. And the other thing too for your research is we have a real problem here in the collar counties, which is a good thing, of biosolids from municipalities. And that's fantastic natural nitrogen that we have to take because otherwise it's going to end up in a landfill. And hopefully in your research you can bring that too, because if we stop totally no-tilling, at least the way things are going right now, we wouldn't be able to take those biosolids. And those biosolids, all that carbon would end up in a landfill. And that's millions of tons of great organic matter that we should be using. But I agree with you, no-tilling is the best thing that we can do. But we've had soils, great soils before, we had synthetic nitrogen. It's just using it at the right time.
I very much agree with that statement. And also, we didn't have new tillage technologies, right? It was moldboard, and I think we suffered a lot of carbon losses. Those deficits that I showed in that global map, we incurred massive deficits globally because we just had old-fashioned plows that would really beat up the soil. I would agree with you too that, so crop rotations have been found to increase carbon through other mechanisms beyond nitrogen. And there's a lot of active research on this, on why is it that if you do, say, a 4-way crop rotation, there's more carbon than if you do, say, corn, soybean. It's kind of an ongoing mystery, but something that our forefathers figured out, right? 1903, Cyril Hopkins at the U of I was talking about 4 to 7 year crop rotation schemes. I think if the economics were to work out, and I think some folks have figured this out, doing things like clovers, vetches, as you point out, would be an excellent way to increase organic matter and in a form with a low C to N that's appropriate. There's another comment there, about the biosolids. So yeah, I'm actually working with MWRD with the support of the Illinois Farm Bureau, in fact, on those biosolids because yes, you're very much correct. Those are rich sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon as well. There's a bit of, I think, suspicion about them in terms of heavy metals, and I think those might be warranted. But MWRD does a very good job from what I've been seeing in terms of filling EPA testing to avoid heavy metals. So yeah, biosolids could go a long way to helping us increase organic matter content.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Oh, wait, we got one. One came in at the end here.
Austin, you talked about the carbon industry and how that's evolving. Where does Farm Bureau stand at this point as far as recommending signing on to things?
Yeah, so we recommend doing your due diligence. So we are not going to advocate for a specific program, obviously, but we do recommend that you have an attorney look at any agreement that you sign. It seems like a lot of the contracts and the agreements have evolved over the last few months, and we've actually had farmers show us these agreements, and they have evolved. And so I think it's almost like a learning process for some of these markets along the way, and we suggest that, you know, our members and farmers throughout the U.S. really take those to their attorneys because of that evolving process, and you really don't know. You know, you can go to your neighbor and your neighbor signed a contract that he agreed with, but it may have changed in between your neighbor signing that contract and you signing it, so it could be completely different. And so we do suggest that all of our members have an attorney look over those. I was talking to a farmer from Southern Illinois on the phone last week who spent $400 to have his attorney look over a contract. So it's not cheap to have somebody look at those. So, but he was pretty serious about signing it, and he wanted to do the due diligence and have his attorney look at it, and he ended up actually not signing it. So it's one of those things to where, you know, it's an investment to do that, but we highly recommend it.
Hearing none, thank you both for joining us today. Appreciate it and all your expertise. All right, well, that was our last session for the day. Can you please give all of our presenters today a big round of applause? I would like to quickly thank all of our sponsors for helping fund and coordinate this event, and I'm going to list them now. There's Compeer Financial, the Center for Agrarian Learning at McHenry County College, Farm Foundation, Food Land Opportunity, Kane County, Open Lands, McHenry County Conservation District, the University of Illinois Extension Service, McHenry County Farm Bureau, and the McHenry Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. I also want to give a huge shout out to a few individuals who really went above and beyond to help pull this together, including Janice Hill, which is in the corner there, Sherry Doyle with the college, and then Morgan Craven, who's been helping with all the AV today. And also to the rest of all of our committee members, thank you so much. We could not have put this on without you. We will be asking you to fill out a quick survey. You'll be receiving that in your email in the next few days, I believe. Oh, it went out already, so expect it in your inbox, okay? And then we just would like you to fill that out so it can give us some great ideas possibly for future programming that we can put on for you in the near future here. And then also, we will be sharing this recording that we did today, so if you have any peers or friends that you think would benefit from the conversations we had today, please pass that link to them and spread the word for us. We'd really appreciate it.